Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Lily grew up in an orphanage. She never questioned who her real parents were, because she'd seen all the other kids. Lily didn't remember her father and mother. She felt like she'd been in the orphanage forever. She was even born here. But a lot of the other kids had it rough. Some of them, living at home, suffered beatings and reproaches. Some of them starved. Some of them saw the hard scenes when alcoholic or drug-addicted parents were not ashamed to lead a habitual lifestyle in front of their children. There were boys and girls who entered the orphanage. The real Mowgli didn't know how to use cutlery, didn't know how to make a bed behind them. Lily looked down on them. She was by nature very often dense. Pleased in appearance, too. The girl grew pretty like a doll. Face as if porcelain. Thin dark eyebrows, long eyelashes, bobbing hair. The teachers and nannies loved Lily, and she did not trouble them at all. They often brought her clothes, some skirts and blouses, bows left by their daughters for the shelves. And Lily was dressed smartly of all her peers. The teachers sincerely wanted to bring Lily into the family and wondered why nobody had taken her so far. After all, as they say, this is a gift version of the child. But potential parents rarely visited them. They preferred to take very young children, no older than 3 years. That's what the old nanny Adriana said. A kid like that is still a mystery. You don't know what he'll grow up to be. And if the kids are older, you can see their nature right away. That same nanny shed some light on Lily's origins. Your mother should have never taken you in, she said. Lily girl at that time was already 12 years old, and she understood a lot. Lily, who had heard something about her relatives for the first time, was surprised. Do you know anything about my mom? Good woman, decent. Yeah, the doctors scared her back in the day. She was into some kind of extreme sports. Well, they said it had something to do with it. Concluded that the baby would be born with a defect. The baby was already far along, about to go into labor, and I understood that her husband forbade her to take you out of the hospital. Her husband had a son in his second marriage, and he told his wife that we had enough of one child. We'll raise my boy, put him on his feet, and that's enough. How do you know that? Your mother came here when you were just transferred from the orphanage. She wanted to know if her daughter was okay. That's when we had that one conversation. And then our supervisor decided that your mother would come here regularly. She didn't like that. Parents are different. Some come in drunk. Some of them are so out of control, you could call the police. So she told me to say that you were adopted, and the state protects the secrecy of adoption. So we won't give you any information. And the truth is, you've been living here just as you are. That's a cruel thing to say, Lily. She wasn't planning on taking you anyway. It's your mother, sighed the nanny. You were really troubled at first, that heart murmur. The doctor would find a heart murmur, then a developmental delay. Then you threw yourself out, and you became the smartest, the prettiest. Since the day Nanny Adriana told the girl the secret, did something change in her? It was as if she'd become bitter at the orphanage and stopped being a role model. The caregivers attributed it to the transitional age and the fact that Lily had fallen in love with David the bully 9th grader. The last name David. Everyone laughed at it as a kid. Maybe that's what shaped the kid's drive, to use his fists at every turn. He had a crush on Lily too, so he got her a present. They sneak off to the tattoo parlor together. David had a knight with a sword on his arms, and Lily had a dragon holding a rose on her shoulder. At night her shoulder ached and she couldn't sleep. Lily went to cry to the nurse Adriana, who was on duty just then. What could she have done to help? Helped a nail with oil on it, and scolded the girl. You're smart enough. You're not some girl from jail to wear a tattoo. You're gonna get tattooed head to toe. Okay, David, he's a guy, and you're gonna be getting those tattoos. Mark my words. Lily thought she loved David too much to refuse his gift. Either way, the dragon would remain as a memento of her first love. And so it was. Soon Lily was unexpectedly adopted. It happened almost against the girl's will. An elderly woman came to the orphanage unexpectedly and told her that her daughter had grown up, left to study, and would not return to her home. And it is painfully dreary to be alone. So she wants to take an older girl, so that her adopted daughter would become her helper and companion. Caregiver immediately saw in this chance for their favorite Lily and began to persuade Aunt Clara to take her. You won't find a better girl. Hardworking, responsible, a real star. Aunt Clara didn't mind, but Lily did. She'd have to leave the orphanage, to part with David without the possibility of seeing her again in the near future. It took a lot of effort to persuade her. Subsequently, Lily had to regret her decision. Aunt Clara took her to the village to a small dark house on the outskirts. She had to learn to do all the housework, even to stow the stove. And the woman had a large vegetable garden, and from spring to fall, she had to literally work there, digging, planting, weeding, helping, processing the harvest. Now Lily no longer resembled a doll. She was badly burned, arms cupped and kneaded. Aunt Clara dressed her poorly. Allowing any money for cosmetics was out of the question. Even the food was Lily compared to the orphanage very meager. Today Aunt Clara cooked soup for the whole day. Tomorrow, again, she fried pancakes or baked pies for the whole day. Lily hoped that at least at school she would be able to eat with her classmates in the school cafeteria. But no, the meal fee Aunt Clara thought was too much. So instead, she wrapped her foster daughters up with her. Still the same piece of cake, but the first time Lily really got up in arms was when she graduated from high school. Why would you want to go anywhere? Aunt Clara said firmly. I put so much effort into you, and now you're going to leave me. Girls don't need that science. You'll get married anyway. You'll have kids and then you'll abandon everything. Why don't you go be a saleswoman? There's a store near your house, 2 minutes away, and you'll get your paycheck right away. And the saleswoman lets you take home expired goods. These products will be very useful to us. Lily knew from bitter experience that it was useless to argue with her foster mother. The girl thanked fate that she had saved money in advance. She worked part-time, hiding it from Aunt Clava to walk and other people's dogs. And she even tutored children from junior high school. Lily found out the bus schedule in advance, left home at dawn, taking with her a minimum of things, her documents, and saved money, and left for the regional center. She had already turned 18, and even if Aunt Clara tries to look for her, she has no rights to return Lily. A few nights the girl slept at the train station as well. She didn't care what school to enter, as long as she got some specialty. And in the meantime to get a dormitory. Coming to the first college in the admissions office, Lily was confused. Fortunately, one of the teachers was a kind soul who talked to the girl, asked her what she could do, what she would like to do, and having heard that Lily likes to grow flowers, advised her to apply for landscape design. Unexpectedly, this choice turned out to be, as they say, an accurate shot on target. And Lily began to learn easily and with passion. Domestic problems were also solved. The college had a good hostel. Lily was put in a cozy room for 3. The roommates were good, companionable, and the girl herself did not notice how the years of study flashed by. When Lily got her diploma, she thought that she would have to work harder than the others. The other girls returned home to their parents. Some of them had gotten married in the meantime. Lily had to think about where to live and where to get the money to pay the rent. Fortunately, quite quickly she found her first clients, and soon with the help of word of mouth. Orders she began to have a lot. Now the girl could rent a modest apartment and buy herself everything she needed. Of course, the labor was not easy and mostly seasonal. In summer, Lily was busy from dawn to dusk. It was good if the customer was attentive and inviting the girl to work, would think about where she could drink tea, have a snack in the middle of the day, and wash in the evening. But many times Lily came home dead tired, dirty, and hungry. It was surprising that she had met Herbert in such an unrepresentable state. Lily was building a slide at a country house. She'd been working on it all day. She didn't think about how she was going to get home until 8 o'clock in the evening. People in this neighborhood were wealthy, they all had cars, and there was no public transportation. Lily was about to call a cab when a car pulled up beside her, and a man at least 10 years older than her offered her a ride. Lily was dense, dirty, and very uncomfortable getting into a shiny car like that. But the man didn't seem to be embarrassed by that at all. All the way they talked casually, and when they said goodbye, Herbert asked Lily to meet again. He courted her as if she were the only woman on earth, and very quickly he proposed to Lily. "I'm sure I've met the one I've been looking for all my life," he said. So why stall for time waiting for something? Before the wedding? Lily, no, and remembered David, the one she loved the most in the world. The new feeling couldn't be compared to the old one. But David was rumored to be living somewhere else in the city. He was working as a mechanic and slowly drinking himself to death. But most importantly, he wasn't looking for Lily, which meant he'd fallen out of love, so she could marry without remorse. But very quickly, after marriage, Lily realized she was in a mess. Yes, she now lived in a big, beautiful house and had enough money for everything: new outfits, her own car, traveling, not to mention good food, which meant a lot to Lily too. But Herbert turned out to be such a jealous and hot-tempered man that life with him became an agony. Lily was not only forced to quit her job, she found herself practically trapped within four walls. Before, the house had been guarded by a tall, clean-cut guy from a private security company. When Lily arrived, he was immediately replaced by an older, balding man in his 60s. There were security cameras in the house. There were surveillance cameras in the house, and soon Lily didn't dare to open the door to the mailman, or the pizza delivery guy, or anyone. And what good was it if she had her own car? She couldn't drive anywhere. If Herbert wasn't sitting next to her, another woman and in another situation immediately filed for divorce. But after Herbert had beaten Lily badly several times, he hinted that she would not have time to get help from anyone. He would just kill her. Maybe it was just a threat, but Lily believed it. She was so afraid of her husband now that as soon as he arched his eyebrows, her voice was taken away from her, and her hands began to tremble finally. He had no problem slapping her or pushing her, so that she flew to the opposite corner of the room. Lily always bruised very easily, and now she walked like a piano player at home. She had to wear clothes that covered not only her body, but also her arms and legs in the summer. Of course, with this way of life, Lily had no girlfriends, and after a few years she turned into a socially unadapted creature. Now, if she suddenly found herself alone in the city, she wouldn't know how to behave in a store or in an entertainment center. Lily felt all the time that her husband was watching her. Her movements were slowing down. They had no children, and Herbert already began to talk about the fact that it is necessary to go to the doctors and find out what is the cause. But one day, when he came home, he found Lily watching a soap opera with fascination. He couldn't escape her admiring gaze, and he decided that his wife had a crush on the actor playing the lead role. That day, Herbert was not in a particularly good mood. He had to deal with a lot of problems at work, including some not-so-pleasant ones, and he snapped. Lily had to call an ambulance. Herbert was very reluctant to let his wife go to the hospital, but the doctor cut her off. "We have to monitor her and rule out internal bleeding. Do you want your wife to die in your arms?" Before that, Lily had to lie to her heart's content that she accidentally slipped on the stairs and fell down unluckily like that. Of course, Herbert went with his wife to the hospital, but they couldn't give Lily a private room. It was all booked up, and the husband was kicked off the ward. "We have visiting hours and you can come back then." The ward manager cut him off, "And we'll talk to your wife about the nature of the injuries." So far, her explanation doesn't give me much confidence. Lily didn't start to feel better until a few days later. The whole time, she was a wreck. It was very painful to move. She was put on drips. Her arm was put in a cast. "Did someone beat you up?" "Who?" asked an elderly nurse as she scrubbed the floors. Lily nodded and couldn't help herself. She cried. Husband frowningly clarified the orderly with a mop under the bed. Lily nodded again. "So run away from him, silly, before it's too late," the orderly advised. "He'll cripple you sooner or later or just kill you." Lily knew deep down that the attendant was right. However, there was an obstacle that could not be ignored. "I have no money," she said. "And without money I won't get far. He would surely find me their heads." The poor orderly cut the conversation short. But a few hours later, she returned to the ward and handed the young woman a $100 bill. "Take it if you're thinking of leaving him. Pay me back when you can." I work hard for my money too. I should be retired by now. But how can you live on that? So I scrubbed the floors from morning till night. Thank you, Lily whispered. I'll pay you back. She didn't have a penny yet. All plans for escape had been rather distracted dreams. Now she was determined, even though she could hardly stand on her feet after her husband's beatings. She decided not to escape at dawn. The hospital woke up early too, and her absence would be noticed in an hour or so. But if she got out of the building late at night, there was a chance that she would be gone until morning, and she would have a few hours head start. Lily put the essentials in a bag, ate everything that had been brought for dinner, though she didn't usually have an appetite for hospital porridge, and went to bed before bedtime. Unexpectedly, she dozed off. In general, the young woman felt relieved, as if the question that had long tormented her had finally been resolved. Lily awoke around midnight. She had managed to sneak out of the room unnoticed. The nurse who was on duty had gone somewhere else. Lily went down to the first floor and slipped out the side door reserved for service personnel. She knew she wasn't going to the train station. There were 2 train stations in the city, one for the railroad and one for intercity buses. But the first bus didn't leave until morning. She would have to buy a ticket with her passport. She'd be found out quickly. The railroad was even worse. There was only one train through town that went to Chicago via New York. It stopped in the evening. And that's when Lily would be intercepted by her husband. The only way out was to get to the highway and hitchhike the rest of the way. That's what she did. The first trucker put her in his truck and dropped her off the next day in a big city. Here it was easier to get lost like a needle in a haystack. One problem. Lily had given him the only bill she had. She had no idea how to ask for change in such a situation. So she found herself in a strange city alone and without money. It was impossible to go to the police. The whole story would come out. She would most likely be sent to her place of residence. Finding a job would take a few days at best. You can't just take the first job that comes along. She would have to look for a place to live, or at least a place where Lily would be paid a sum of money in advance, and she could rent a corner of the house. All the next day, the young woman wandered around the city and read the advertisements posted on bus stops and poles. Her situation was desperate. Here they offer a place for a caregiver, but she has no phone number. She can't call and make an appointment, and she has no money to pay for the call and machine. And there's no address on the ad. And another suggestion: dumpling pilots are required, and there's even an address. But it's on the other side of town. And how do you get there? No trivia. A shuttle bus. They also offered a shelter for homeless alcoholics and drug addicts. The ad guaranteed a night's lodging, food, a job with a daily paycheck. But Lily hesitated. She imagined what kind of contingent would be there. She still felt very ill. Her arm ached, and she was dizzy with fatigue and hunger. Lily found some change in her pocket and decided to go to the store to buy at least some bread. She was out of luck. There were no cheap loaves left on sale, only expensive slices in cellophane. Nearby on the display case were different kinds of nuts, and Lily couldn't resist. Her hand reached out, as if the young woman remembered her childhood in the orphanage and David, who from time to time stole chocolates from the store for her girlfriend. But Lily is grabbed by the arm. The guard about 5 years older than her was a tall guy. "Come with me," he commanded. "But me, I'll put everything back. I haven't eaten anything in the hall yet," fed Lily. Without saying a word, he led her into the back room and told her to take off her clothes. Why? She was scared. "How do I know what else you've got in your pockets or in your bra? You women have such a huge anatomy. Get undressed. Or shall I call the police?" Burning with shame, Lily began to take off her blouse. It was very uncomfortable for her. One arm was in a cast, but she managed to pull the bra strap off her shoulder, revealing a tattoo of a dragon with a rose. "Stop," suddenly the guard said. And Lily noticed the change in his voice. "Where did you get that?" The last thing the young woman expected was for the guard to be interested in the tattoo. And this was stuffed a long time ago in the orphanage. She also said and regretted mentioning the orphanage. Now the guy will definitely think that she is a thief. After all, for the orphanage runs a bad name. Take the change. Good price for a couple of uneaten nuts. Lily almost cried. Saidi but at her the guard and hurriedly pulled out a phone. Who are you calling? Lily was frightened, but the guy didn't listen to her. Mom, he said. When Mom was picked up on the other end, she seemed to have found herself. I've regretted putting my daughter in the wrong hands my whole life. Now I can already summarize and realize that my story is unconventional. The first time I got married right after the institute, but it did not bring me happiness. We had no children, but I had a niece, Daria. My older sister moved to France on a program to work there as a nanny. She left her only daughter behind for now. She told me she'd pick her up later. She called me and told me the Americans were so smiling. You left your own child to nurse ours, and Daria grew up quietly in our home. And now I had no doubt that she would stay with us for good. It's hard to walk in heels, especially if you're not used to it. It's true that not all heels are suitable for the habit. I remember when I went on duty at a printing house in another neighborhood, in high stilettos, only to go to the theater in them. I went home barefoot. I don't care if it's the main street. I don't care if they take me for an idiot. But what bliss! And these boats are medieval instruments of torture come to life. Most of all, I wanted to unscrew the heel and throw them in the nearest garbage can. But on such high, but stable, as on my black shoes, you can walk a lot and a long time. Last year, walking was the only thing that saved me from despair. A feeling that has no right to be. What do you mean it doesn't have a right to be? Any feeling that isn't evil is worth living. And to trample for the first time, breaking through the routine of everyday life and love, figuratively speaking, to step on it is not a foot. The routine was still that. Husband came from work and lay down. The dominant position was horizontal. It didn't matter what to watch Village of Fools or How to Become a Millionaire. TV, good screen, big couch, soft comforts and snow. It does not matter to read a novel in the fantasy genre studied along and across or a primer forgotten on the table. Never mind sleeping or awake, but lying down, but not saying an extra word. Not participating in the life of the family at all. So I've always thought of myself as a single woman. Taking seriously for a friend this addition to the couch. The cushion didn't work, and there was still time for reflection, despite the external business. It's a waste. They say that physical work distracts from thoughts. Washing machine hums, hands rinse heavy snow under the blanket or peel potatoes, or wash floors on automatic. The head thinks and thinks. And in the end, neither from these endless affairs nor from the thoughts that do not leave neither day nor night. I want to sob and whimper, God, I'm so tired, and then lie down and die quietly. All around, life was boiling in all its manifestations. It was spring outside with a bright, tender sun. Everything was beginning to grow. And while every blade of grass was perceived as a holiday, its later will start to understand. Radish weed aside radish pro weed. And meanwhile, nettles for happiness. Its first leaves fluffy emerald birds in their special spring voices so early in the morning, when almost darkness is a little paler than the real night. Daria is waiting for me at home. She has 3 silences of her own. Silence 1, only the rustle of pages can be heard behind the lessons. 9th grade is still without a tutor. We save money. We're saving money for university. Silence 2, in front of the mirror, only the clatter of heels when turning here and there. The other day on Saturday, I wore my most expensive shoes. Of course, she wasn't working. She was standing off to the side. And guys were distracted by it, because in such a form not to rake the garbage. And for disco, a mini skirt, net tights and shoes with rhinestones. Quiet. 3rd computer game. Her favorite game. A town populated by fictional characters. If at first she played by the rules like kids play dolls, build a house, leave it, supply it, populate it about the family, now Daria entertains herself by acting out whole shows. She has, for example, show hunger. She buys a luxury mansion for hers that has everything from a telescope to a swimming pool. Everything except the refrigerator. For a while, the little people enjoy life, splashing in the jacuzzi, singing from the bandstand, playing the piano. Then they start reaching out to their mistress and asking for food. She feeds them once a day, buys a plate of pies. Who had time, he ate. After a while, the pestilence begins. To sad music, death with a sight comes for one or the other. An urn with ashes is left in place of the deceased. Daria immediately sells the urn and the house becomes haunted. For the last survivor, Daria buys the most expensive refrigerator full of food. When I ask her if she feels sorry for the computer babies, she coldly shrugs her shoulders. What's there to feel sorry for? It takes 2 minutes to make new ones. I wish I had that kind of willpower. Daria will probably have a personality like my coworker. She's an animal trainer by trade. It seems that if her life was in the circus, she'd be able to handle lions without a problem. So far, her husband has achieved a rare degree of training. She wouldn't speak to him for 2 months at a time, sending him to his mom. Despite her pleas, her boss picked her up every morning and they drove to work together. Anyway, now Peter. After 10 years of marriage, she's pure silk. Not only does everything around the house, but sees Nancy as the one and only incomparable, of which you can't even put anyone else next to her. 2 things happened in my life at that time. I got into freediving and fell unrequitedly in love. Is an adventure enough for you? Asked my other friend Miranda. She couldn't have said anything different. By then I was in my 6th year of working for Incredible magazine. Every month it came to readers. 200 pages of photo text. Where would so much incredible stuff come from? We were sent materials from all over the world. Because the requirements for content we had were small, royalties were paid correctly. But many people want to tell about unusual phenomena occurring in their neighborhoods. Some have seen with their own eyes, the whole. Some saw mysterious mirages. We processed these materials and published them. And my friend Miranda did the publicity. A lot of the space in the magazine was devoted to advertisements. My friend was a terrible neighbor, didn't dare to get out, even if someone invited her to the villa. For her, there was only her own, very comfortable apartment and office. That's why she considered my life to be literally nomadic. After all, my husband, niece, nephew, and I often traveled around the country. And then there's diving. Many people like to swim underwater, but to come into almost related contact with the depth of the dive to the limit of meters for a man, having nothing but caresses on such a dare few. I'll tell you in a nutshell why I took up swimming. I started learning as a child, spending vacations at my grandparents' place. The Black Sea in those places is very beautiful. On my trouble, I discovered a mask and fins. Why bad luck? Because I held onto the water then. I could barely swim only a few meters. And flippers are a special thing. Even for a beginner, they give you faith in your own strength. It seems that you glide along the sea surface quickly, like a dolphin, and it is impossible to drown. I came running to the still deserted beach. In the early morning, the coarse pebbles were cold, and the sea was also still cold and clear as a tear. I quickly threw off my sundress and left it on the stones and threw myself into the arms of the sea, which picked me up and carried me. You lower your masked face into the water, and you are transported to another world. Paris. Below in a silly haze, underwater landscapes change. Huge rocks, overgrown with shells, green and red algae. The slanting rays of the sun, and white transparent umbrellas and silence. You hear only your own breathing through the tube. 200 meters from the shore, a rock was hiding under the water. You can sit down, have a rest. And from the shore, the sight is fantastic. A man sits in the middle of the sea as if he weighs nothing, or he could walk on the water like a saint. I ran my fingers through the thick, fluffy seaweed that covered the rock, and then my eyes slipped off my foot and I couldn't catch it. That's how I was left completely helpless, quite far from the shore. Back I could not. After all, I couldn't hold on to the water very well, and the distance was long. I had to wait until there was someone I could call for help. In the meantime, the only thing I could hold on to was to keep the waves from washing me off the rock. And then I saw the girl, where she had swum from, and where she was going. A small black head flashed in the waves. The girl was paddling leisurely and with the confident movements of an experienced swimmer. "Help me, please," I shouted. It was embarrassing to ask, but it was even more frightening to be left without help. It's so easy to drown. I explained in a few words what had happened. The girl dived in silently. She didn't show her face for a long time. Then she surfaced and handed me my blue flipper with new speckles. "Now you can go back to shore," she said calmly, and she swam on. The same measured sweep of her arms, and soon her black head was no longer distinguishable in the waves. From that moment I realized, firstly, that I had to cope with any situation on my own. And secondly, I decided to learn to swim as well as this stranger. And I did. What's more, I began to dive to considerable depths without scuba diving. Free diving requires from a person long for several years of training and all the strength. Several times I surfaced from great depths, being on the verge of consciousness. Blue lips. The depth must be honored. The depth calls. I want to go into it and never come back. Every dive is a risk. The way athletes usually play with death. I had a period of depression after a few serious dives, claimed marks in competitions. I achieved then. The computer on my wrist showed it. But by some miracle, I pulled myself to the surface. I don't remember. And not at that depth. I was drawn downward, slipping and sliding further into that blue. Just a little bit more. And if it wasn't for my body, my mind would have stayed in the depths forever. And then I couldn't see water for a long time, not even in a glass. I thought it was the end of my normal life. But there was a man who took it upon himself to cure me. He was the head of the department in our town. His name was Ethan, and he saved me from the asylum. The doctor said, "Rest," and my first feeling was anger. "What do you mean rest? Does resting make it go away?" That feeling of helplessness and unwillingness to live. Blossoming depression in all its glory. But the doctor kept convincing me. "I know how to cure you. There's nothing you can do. My fight is lost." She's always been a big deal to me since the first dive. And now, even though I'm back, alive, she's still got the upper hand. She's gotten inside my mind. It's drowning me. I'll help you, believe me. At the hospital, he put me in a private room. The treatment consisted of injections, which he gave me twice a day. His hands were magic. He'd come in the morning and ask how you're doing. Talk about something. And then he dropped the empty syringe in the tray. And I'm irresistible again. I want to sleep. I hug my pillow and sleep. I sleep. A respite from the nightmares that are becoming habitual. Before, in almost every dream, I saw that I overestimated their strength, lost the very point of return, and I cannot resurface. I, spreading my arms, as in a soft change, go into the depths, into the abyss. And here, for the first time, I began to sleep with a dead sleep, without heavy dreams. Ethan came in one day and I cried. He looked at my face and put the syringe away. And now, he said, we'll get better slowly. From that day on, I sat on the balcony in my bathrobe. 4th floor, who'll see? She doesn't even know how to do anything. And cried. Crying as much as you want? He said it was okay. Remember the old fairy tale about paradise? Only with tears came out of my eye a shard of the magic word mirror. I fell in love with this man as we fall in love with our saviors, with those who delivered us from physical suffering. And my love was torn because it was unrequited. No, this man was not married, and I did not bring down anyone's family. But he valued his freedom above all else. He wanted to improve his career, travel, socialize with friends. On the other hand, I had a husband, and he didn't deserve for me to cheat on him. If Georgie had reciprocated my feeling, everything would have been solved. Simply, I would have honestly told my husband that I had fallen out of love with him, but no one promised me anything. And if I did decide to divorce, I'd be alone. I read somewhere that the true hell is loneliness, not fires, not devils, not frying pans. Loneliness. When I met Ethan, I thought I was done with loneliness forever. I'd made a friend. I didn't want to see, realize, and accept what was obviously different for Ethan. I was just a patient, shallow, unobtrusive patient who was simple and easy to relate to. Besides, he had healed me, and that too was a reason for him to treat me with warmth. But they were all wonderful and agonizing too. Those days in the hospital, we walked on paths strewn with pine needles. We sat on a bench by the pond. I'd tell something interesting from my life, thanks to the incredible. There was more than enough to go around. Ethan talked about the clinic, about his patients. There was something elusive missing from our conversations, something that would allow me to rest my head on his shoulder and close my eyes. When I got back on my feet, I went to see a psychologist. In our town, 2 husband and wife were considered the best in this field. I scored the reviews on the internet and realized that the husband is actually a wife hater. Clients sadly wrote that he opened their eyes and that it turns out in all the troubles in their lives they are to blame themselves. Why did they return to this psychologist? Again, it was a mystery to me. I went to see his wife, an attractive, well-groomed woman. About 40 years old, her name was Maria. "Love brought me here," I said. "I can only be happy for you." She smiled. Unrequited, I clarified. Love. In any case, a gift from God. And even if unrequited, it can bear fruit. Spiritual growth, wisdom, experience. Sit down, let's work. Maria. She told me to sit in the chair, cover my eyes, and relax. "What has offended you the most?" she asked, switching to you. I thought for a few moments. While Ethan was treating me, he was impeccably polite and attentive, but I was getting better. The treatment was over. It was time to get back to my life. He discharged me. I blew my nose like a little girl, and he said goodbye like a regular patient and didn't say he wanted to see me again. Didn't even ask for my phone number. I see. Maria began to speak slowly, clearly. She was suggestive. "Now it's night for you." A night when everything from the tips of your toes to your scalp hurts, but it hurts the most to breathe. It's the dying hope of his love. If you have survived this most difficult time, you will begin to heal. Where does recovery begin? You will slowly begin to remember that there are other people in the world with their own wants and needs. Maybe you have a mom who has had a sick child lately who has missed you so much. Feeling sorry for them feels like shame that you thought so little of them. The first sign of recovery. You'll start to notice that there are some nice things in the world that aren't related to your loved one. A warm bath, a good book, fine perfume. Have you gained weight? Nature has given each of us an amazing amount of strength. But if you don't want to repeat the same old pain, if you don't want to be tormented anymore, let's think together what to do so that you don't fall into this trap again. What's the difference between happy love and destructive love? Crazy love is also called crazy love because it involves inequality. You are capable of loving and your partner is not. The more you give your soul to him to awaken reciprocal love, the less you get from him. I went to Maria for a few weeks. An affair with life is more than an affair with a man. She convinced me. It includes all kinds of love of family, of home, of animals, of one's business, of a beautiful city, of good weather, and of course of men too. If one thing is taken away from you, one thing remains, and the rest I collect love stories, Maria said. Not fictional stories, but real stories that happen to people. I remember an old story printed in a magazine. A man wrote about how lonely he was. He got a lot of letters. He chose a woman with 5 children. A year later, the magazine published pictures of them in a cramped apartment. They are drinking tea in the kitchen deep in the night when the children are finally asleep and they are happy. Or the story of 2 old people who met in a polyclinic, she in her 80s, he in his 80s. So what? That they found each other only now. Love brings joy regardless of age, and if you're shaking your head right now, you won't meet anyone like me. Think if you didn't know he existed. You'd live in the world and not grieve. Would look at men with wide open eyes and look for your destiny. So search, believe in yourself. It's not easy. It takes a lot of work to bring out the best in yourself, but only then will you feel that you live in complete harmony with yourself, that you're happy. I guess God heard Marina and sent me another version of happiness. I realized I was pregnant. For years, my husband and I had dreamed of having a child, but something prevented me from rejoicing with all my soul. I guess I had a premonition of the future. Time after time, the doctors didn't like the ultrasound results. And I realized that probably everything I had been through had taken its toll on the baby and my diving to greater depths, and the medications I was given at the sanitarium. In the end, when my daughter was born, I was told that she would not be a full human being. Everyone convinced me to give her up, from the midwife at the birth center to my husband. Have you found out you're not infertile yet? The doctors assured me, "You'll take care of yourself. You will lead a healthy life and give birth to a normal child." Is this girl capable of destroying your family? Men can't stand living in a family where children are constantly sick with no hope of recovery. For a bitter minute, I agreed, signed a waiver to give up the baby. I was burning with guilt. I tried to find out something about my daughter at the orphanage where she'd gone, but they told me pretty quickly that the girl was adopted. "She's hopelessly ill." I exclaimed. "So some kind people found her." The headmistress shrugged her shoulders. They decided to make sure that the girl, the rest of her century, to live in good conditions. She didn't know my story and didn't want to get into it. My guilt was compounded even more. My sister finally obtained citizenship in Paris and took her daughter to live with her. Doria was leaving with enthusiasm. Young people love to travel. And fate brought Ethan and me together again. Ethan did not like holidays for the imposed obligation to have fun. He didn't like Christmas, especially not as a human being. This is not law-abiding Germany, where not only every visit is scheduled, but even every smile, gift, and candle burning. We have a hand here, a shoulder unfolded. And the fact that they invented these Christmas vacations in imitation of Europe, so it is a punishment in general. People simply consider it their duty to scroll through a month's family budget in the first 3 days. And what to do with the rest of the days? He doesn't know. And those who vacation in Courchevel are out of the question. They are few, and they have their own parallel world, which has nothing to do with the lives of ordinary citizens. And it's these ordinary citizens who become the patients of their department. This time they stayed with Jack and a recent medical school graduate. Of course, if Ethan had his way, he would have banned paid medical education. And to get it into the heads of some smart heads and lawmakers, he'd suggest that they and their relatives get their surgeries from the likes of Jack. But the sneaky part is that they would be treated by luminaries of learning. Jack attends surgeries and learns from senior colleagues. The process seems to start from scratch. He doesn't know the most basic things. And if anything, he'll honestly admit he hasn't been to any of these lectures. If Jack ever becomes a normal surgeon, Ethan can safely go to the theater as a potential ballet dancer. Jack flew into the resident with his eyes popping out of his orbits in horror. Ethan screamed he's in the emergency room with a man brought in and blood pouring out of his stomach. Massive bleeding. "Look, hurry up, I'm scared." Ethan ran to the emergency room. There, a citizen lay on a stretcher and quietly moaned, pressing his hand to his stomach. His plaid shirt was soaked with blood from massive bleeding. The casualty was perhaps a little too ruddy. Ethan lifted, tugged at its material, and saw that the citizen's stomach was mechanized. But the persistent odor of booze would have knocked anyone off their feet. Blood was pooling from a deep cut on his right arm and a narrow trickle dripped from his broken nose. The man opened one eye and, seeing Ethan, uttered, "Doctor, it was Alex who bottled me." The bastard hit me in the head, and then Jack stood next to him with his arms folded across his chest in prayer. Nurse Helen put a tourniquet on the man, and the sufferer was sent to the trauma center under his shirt. Was it too weak to look? Ethan Jack asked, walking down the corridor. But so much blood, so much blood. The future surgeon shook his head sadly, started cheerfully muttered Ethan, sinking down on the couch in the resident. "It's 9:55 on the clock. Good if there are no major surprises and major surgeries, Assistant Jack wouldn't wish on an enemy. I'm gonna have to pull some of my coworkers away from the holiday table. I hate to do that." Ethan opened the refrigerator in the far corner, lurking, donated by one of the grateful patients. A bottle of Armenian cognac, 7 years old. If there's no emergency, at 12 o'clock he and Jack will have a small drink. In the corridor, the patients sleep quietly. In the meantime, Ethan has Jack make sandwiches. We should at least get a little something to eat while things are quiet. Jack hustles obsequiously. Deftly he sliced a clear slice of ham and stacked them on slices of fresh loaf. 2 scoops of coffee for you, as always. He asked respectfully, opening the can in the cafe. Ethan nodded and thought that Jack might make a good bartender. No sooner had Ethan eaten the first bite of his sandwich than there was a knock at the door. The gray-haired head of Benjamin's patient from Ward 6 peeked through the crack. "Doctor, I need an enema." "It's just that on the second day, nothing is working. It's so hard." "All right, I'll tell you." "Nurse," Ethan nodded and told Jack to find Helen, who disappeared. Probably gone to her friend Kate. "Urology. You won't. You'll be giving your grandmother an enema yourself," he threatened. "Jack, I don't know how to do that." He was scared standing in the doorway. "You'll learn." Ethan encouraged him. 10 days ago, Benjamin was brought to the ward in the most serious condition, 80-year-old old woman. As it turned out, she had eaten a guest and some lard, and she was twisted. So the poor woman could not breathe, could not charm. Ultrasound showed that her gallbladder was full of stones and needed emergency surgery. "Maybe we shouldn't, doctor," moaned Benjamin, whose cheeks were the same color as the hospital sheets. "I'm 80 years old and still dying. But not this one. You could have done it at home in your own bed without me." Ethan cut him off and told him to get the operating room ready. 3 days later, Benjamin was already shuffling down the hospital corridor and was taking a keen interest in life. During her rounds, she didn't miss an opportunity to ask Ethan if he knew anything about his marital status. "That cute old guy from the room that was operated on a week ago? I don't see anyone coming to see him," Benjamin sighed. "Perhaps he is a childless widower," Ethan suggested thoughtfully, and saw the old woman's eyes brighten. "Did I find it?" Jack exclaimed, as excitedly as if it were the latest scientific discovery. "Helen and Kate were sitting at our place. They were already celebrating." Ethan asked angrily. "I don't know," Jack mused, but Helen had already taken Benjamin away. In the emergency room, an incredibly made-up girl in a scribe's coat was sitting in a 3 posterior position, complaining of a sharp pain in her right side. Said ER Dr. Andrew, "Most likely appendicitis." Ethan tells the maiden to lie down on the couch. With a slight movement of her shoulder, she threw her singers to the floor and found herself in the most unclothed clothes. Only a sequined bra and the same sparkling thong. What kind of masquerade? It's not a month. It's May. Ethan was surprised. Cigarettes. Behind the counter, the girl twisted right at work. The girl stood there. "And what kind of work uniform do you have?" Ethan asked innocently. "It's not what you think," she said, embarrassed. "I didn't think anything," Ethan said. "I just assumed you were from the Walrus Society." "We were invited to a corporate party to striptease," she explained. "They promised to pay us well. When I was 100, I got a jolt of electricity." She put her hand on the bottom of her belly. The gynecologist was already looking. Andrew said hurriedly, in response to Ethan's questioning look, "It's not their department." Jack stared at the guitar-shaped curve of the stripper's body. He seemed willing to study anatomy all he wanted at this point. Half an hour later, Ethan walked out of the operating room. Appendicitis isn't the most complicated surgery. Didn't need to disturb any of his colleagues. Jack was fine. At 11:45, Ethan looked into Ward 4, where the strippers had been taken after the operation. The girl opened her eyes, and when she saw Ethan, she suddenly cried. "Who'd want me so ugly now?" Ethan raised his eyebrows, but with his stomach positioned. The sickly woman explained. "First of all, no one crucified anyone." Ethan suddenly took offense. "I did a cosmetic one. It came out butt to butt. Slava Zaitsev would be jealous." In a week at least, we were left again. He was quiet and added, "But I wouldn't advise it. Or he'll get a left side disorder, and we have no work to do, and they won't pay." "I am now crushed," sighed the girl. "Why have you sued them?" "For personal injury." Ethan winked and left the room. Room 5. He looked in because the lights were on and there were invited but clearly excited voices. And it was a good thing he looked in. On the bedside table in front of the patient, Zhilieva, recently operated on for a stomach ulcer. Yes, there was a good bowl of homemade dumplings and an unopened bottle of vodka. What the hell is that? At the risk of Ethan flying into the room. Who brought it? My wife? Confused, Zhiliev. He ate the feast. Asked Ethan, pouring cold sweat and pointing at the dumplings. Already ate. Zhiliev didn't have time to spell, pushing the bowl away. Ethan handed the bowl to Jack, who flew at Jack's scream and told him to immediately send everything to the food waste tank. and I'll personally give this bowl to your wife tomorrow, Ethan said. And the vodka, too, he added, grabbing the bottle. I'll explain to her what your wife would have been if you tasted all that. And who? Giliev was surprised. A widow of vodka, broth, kefir. Ethan cut him off and headed for the resident's room. There he found Vasilenko enthusiastically devouring hot dumplings. The clock read 11:55. Bon appetit, Ethan barked. Yes, I just tasted it. Jack excused himself and reluctantly went to throw away the dumplings. He and Jack had barely had a shot of brandy before a frightened Helen flew into the resident. Ethan, there's Santa Claus being brought in, shouted she. I didn't order it. Ethan was confused, unless it was to make Jack happy. Insulting Ethan, Jack's egotistical response. Don't you get it? Helen got worried. He's in serious condition. See for yourself. Santa Claus was lying on a gurney in his red sweater and white beard. Red watercolor circles stood out sharply on her pale cheeks. Nearby, shaking violently, was a frightened elf in a white minicoat. A frightened elf in a white mini fur coat. She held in her hands a snow-white beard and his red and white hat. Since 6 o'clock we've been going on calls, the elfess explained confusedly. Children are happy, and parents are always trying to give them treats. And he has such a temper that he can't refuse anyone. I told him a long time ago that enough is enough, so he doesn't listen. Who are you to him? Ethan inquired, examining the patient. The granddaughter is an elf. Ah, that's me in the script. That's my wife. They decided to make a little extra work. Examined long ago. Last asked Ethan last year. He had chronic pancreatitis and needed to diet, and he broke it. Violated is an understatement, Ethan said thoughtfully. Santa Claus gave him a shot and put it in IV. An elven girl sat next to him and held his hand. A white mini fur coat hung on the headboard of the bed, reminiscent of the angel wings that served. Ethan gestured to her in the hallway without her New Year's Eve attire in a short skirt and sweater. She resembled a student who had run away from a lecture. If his condition doesn't improve, we'll prepare for surgery, Ethan warned her quietly. He will live in the neighborhood in her eyes, she asked. Of course he will, Ethan reassured the girl. I've never seen Santa die of any kind of pancreatitis. From the resident, he called the head of the department just in case, and warned that a serious patient had been admitted. The chief promised to come if necessary. By morning, Santa Claus was feeling better, and Ethan told the elf that she could go home. Then he looked into the stripper's room and was surprised to find Jack there. He was carefully checking the poor girl's stitching, and without Ethan noticing, he was passionately telling her how many seriously ill patients he had saved from imminent death. Happy New Year, said Ethan and added Namakai, poking her in the side some more. Bae, what is Jack talking about? Happy New Year. Turning in for his shift, Ethan thought that this time he had had a pretty quiet New Year's Eve shift, and then they'd bring me in with the same trivial appendicitis. After looking at those who were to take over the shift, Ethan took over the operation himself. It means a lot to the patient. He's in a lot of pain, and with a stranger next to him at the time, it's doubly scary. You don't know what to expect from him. But with Ethan, I always knew that everything would be all right. I remembered those days in the hospital as a blissful vacation. The shots were good for the pain. My favorite doctor came to see me several times a day, and I didn't owe anyone any chores either at home or at work. I had time to think things over carefully. I realized that my husband and I could exist in parallel without interfering with each other, that loneliness would be my companion probably forever. My hopeless love began to slowly recede. The pain dulled. Or maybe, on the contrary, the feeling became another deeper feeling. I no longer wanted Ethan for myself. I didn't want him to be my most important thing. Now I knew he was there and he was doing well. I was discharged, and in the spring, I found out I was pregnant. At the ultrasound, this time we went together with my husband. The doctor turned out to be a man, thin, skinny. They say he used to work in a maternity hospital. At first, if he had to help move a woman in labor on a gurney, the midwives called him James. And then they were convinced he couldn't do that kind of work. That's what James said. They're sliding the probe. I think we're pretty flat on the belly. Here's one heart, here's another heart, another head. What's that? I really disliked such questions during the examination and noticed how pale my husband turned. You will have twins, dear, said the doctor. Not 100% sure, but almost certainly. A boy and a girl. Outside, my husband took me under his arm. See, he said excitedly, this is fate. Instead of that inferior girl we gave up, she sends us 2 children at once. In such cases, they say that God gives with both hands. Suddenly, I ripped his hand away. What if these children are not born perfect? I asked. We'll put them in good hands again. How can you and I talk about God? After all, maybe our girl grows up normal, pleasing her foster parents. We've been told that can't happen. You know what happens. Doctors make mistakes sometimes. And even if she's gone, we'll never know. It'll haunt me for the rest of my life. We didn't talk the rest of the way. I did give birth to a boy and a girl. I left my favorite dives. I didn't care about that anymore, except to the sea. We could sometimes get away with the kids, but the country was taking a turn for the worse. There was another crisis, and we bought a villa. If my husband thought that our twins are compensation received from fate for the child we lost, I thought that the new villa is compensation for the one that tormented me all my childhood and adolescence. Villa Mom was given when she was expecting me, and not just so on, and her friend who worked in the house, and repeated under a lying stone water does not flow. These plots of land knocked out Mom, and in the 8th month looked at a plot of clay, and in the road 10 minutes walk from her factory. And she cried. Really? Said the father. You know how we are here all arranged and became not only my parents, but all the factory workers. Happy owners of hell knows what, but their inch of land to build a garden city. My father built it in his own way. He said something very obscene on my tongue. For instance, he had a cellar in the cabin. You open the hatch and underneath is a square room 2 meters high. The empty one jumps out, and there is another hatch in the floor, and under it there is another such 2-meter square room, and again without a ladder. And there's potatoes, baths. I still don't know how my father got down there. Maybe he jumped down and pulled himself up on a rope with buckets in his teeth. But nothing's been stolen from us in a quarter of a century. Thieves opened the hatch first. They'd see it was empty, and they'd leave, disappointed. Once they could not contain their feelings and wrote on the wall of the cabin in big blue letters, goat. That's what we've been calling it ever since. Villa, villas, goat. But kind of like Pippi Longstocking had a chicken. And my dad also raised chickens. He'd buy chickens, spread a few bags of millet on the floor, put a pot of water on the floor, lock up the house and leave. He'd come back and they'd be all grown up. They wandered not in yellow down, but in white feathers. The chickens grew up quiet and without problems. Mom loved the villas to the point of madness. At one time, she chose the institute on the principle that would not leave the city. And in the city was one polytechnic, and my mom, instead of going to any university biofaculty or agricultural, became an engineer. And for more than 30 years, she settled down in the design office. And so after a full day in the red-hot reinforced concrete thighs, Mom would break out in the evening, crushed and goat. She could graft 25 new branches onto one apple tree. She was chewed out, even sticking her dry sagebrush into the ground. Although around the plot allocated for summer houses were solid chemical plants, not caterpillars. Not even the worms didn't survive. After the factory emissions, probably the vegetables and fruits that grew here weren't useful. And if they were tested, they'd be off the charts in terms of different chemical compounds. But my sister and I grew up on it. The harvests, against all odds, were spectacular. Just a sea of strawberries and raspberries, pears, apples. We never had a car, and we had to carry the harvest home ourselves. So when I remember summer, I'd always have a bucket of cherries in one hand and a bucket of currants in the other, and with all that weight a long walk under the hot sun to the bus stop. And my sister with bags with all sorts of strong carrots. And in the summer, we always turned off elevators and hot water. So we had to carry the crops up to the 8th floor. And here you are dirty, tired, angry. There's no warm water to wash yourself, and the crops still have to be processed. Such a quantity won't fit in the refrigerator. And without a refrigerator, it's lost. I remember my sister came in to make apple juice. I was juicing. It was bouncing and vibrating on the table. How much juice did you squeeze? It's bouncing and vibrating on the table. And everything's gingerly singing. And the walls and the ceiling, and my sister's all upside down. Even her glasses are splattered. And she curses in a way that would make the laborers rest. Where did that come from? And then my sister and I insisted and sold the villa. My sister hated it. I didn't like to work the land at that time either. A neighbor bought it to combine 2 plots. That's how much my mom's teeth cost at that time, which she had done in a private office. But the teeth were uncomfortable. They were more and more in the glass. And then our dog turned the glass upside down and ate the teeth. I didn't marry the children. In the summer, we now lived in a cottage where my little ones could run barefoot. It was good that they grew up alone. The neighbors had no children. But my daughter and son were not bored without peers. They had enough of each other, although the twins were born just 5 minutes apart. They were very different, Anna and Max. Anna, as they say, is a princess. She was always a terribly fidgety child, and to force her to sit still and do things quietly, I would pull out my wedding dress and put it on her. It seemed so unimaginably beautiful to Anna that she would freeze and be afraid to move. And she'd sit there for an hour or two. All so beautiful. She was not yet 2 years old when we went for a walk in the city center, and I took her to a wedding dress salon out of sheer wit. There was my dress on Flower Boulevard. Not the only one. My God, it was like a savage who had prayed for his crystal beads all his life, and suddenly found himself in a shop full of costume jewelry. Anna grabbed the 2 nearest dresses with a dead grip and howled, "Mine." We managed to take her away, only by promising that in another store dress even better. So my husband and I took her to several more stores, and only then lured her to the bus stop. And then she howled all the way home for the hour we drove. And for Christmas we gave her her own dress, an airy princess dress made of white netting with stars and turnovers. It was a delight. It can't be told and can't be described. The trouble started when it was time to take the dress off. She was only 2 years old at the time. Time to eat and bedtime. So do we shake Anna out of the dress? And from then on, until she grew out of that outfit. My daughter's greatest happiness was to dress up as a princess. Max is different, completely indifferent to clothes. It's hard to convince him to change from dirty to clean. His main hobby is animals, anything from a butterfly to an elephant. Of course, my son rarely sees elephants, only when we go to the zoo. And it all started with the fact that being very young, my son was sick. He lay quite sick and miserable and asked for a rabbit. In case you didn't know, the only way to have fun with a fever is a rabbit. When I got my paycheck, I went to get a rabbit. Hare at that time in the city had one. I ran a few stores and only in the last saw this creature. In the cage sat a rabbit dwarf, small, white, the size of a rat. I bought it, brought it in. Max, of course, was in complete delight and was afraid to breathe on him. In the morning, everything was fine, but in the afternoon, the rabbit fell on its side and lay down. Only the whiskers move a little, and he snores a little audibly. We call the vet. They say bring, but it is clear that the hare to the hospital will not reach the hospital. Max is squatting nearby and wipes off his cheeks. Here's large fenced. I took the animal, put it in a box. Let it rest, I say. Really just did not know what to do. Half an hour later, I see Sat Bunny washed up, falling from weakness, went to the feeder to eat, and fell asleep, coming back to the saucer with the food in a ball like a kitten. Turns out he was stressed from the extra attention. Then, when I decided to go to the orphanage and find out something about my daughter, Christmas was approaching. I wasn't feeling very well. My head and shoulders ached. I guess all illnesses are a reflection of the way we live. I had too much on my shoulders, and I had a lot of heavy thoughts in my head. We hadn't bought a Christmas tree yet, and the kids were pestering me the day before, asking if I'd forget to bring the forest beauty in time. And on that day, our employee said that Christmas trees for journalists would be free of charge, and the national park had already allocated them. They were brought, and they are lying in the garage. You can take them. I'm off. I am glad that the epic of the previous year will not be repeated. We almost got screwed then. At first, there was a wild quantity of Christmas trees, and they were sold everywhere. The market was like a lumberyard. And then either it turned out that the trees were not quite legal, or the traders lost hope of selling the goods and left. But a few days before Christmas, there were no more trees, neither live nor artificial. And Anna and I stood in the middle of the market, looked at the dirty snow with vicious needles, and thought that all the first year without. And then, as in Soviet times, comes a woman and whispering asks you a Christmas tree together with us overestimated, still unfamiliar father and daughter. And in the dirty, empty barracks, they had 2 trees on the floor. One still looked like a Christmas tree, but the other had 2 branches, one at the top and one at the bottom. And we carried this fir tree with a stick. Then we sat down with it at the bus stop and called my husband, who had been sent to look for a Christmas tree in other parts of the city. We got one, only you meet us because we're not carrying it. We sat there and hid it behind our backs because we were embarrassed that it was so ugly. And everyone thought we were hiding it because we were greedy and didn't want to tell them where they sold them. It was the last Christmas tree in town. We took it as a basis because at the dacha we have a spruce, which my mother brought in a scarf from near Street Petersburg, from the Ship Grove. The fir tree has already grown taller than the house. We cut off a few branches from her and screwed to our freak. And now you can choose the trees of your choice. That's great. We don't have much room in the house. All the rooms are crammed with furniture. The only place we can put a tree is on the table. So I asked in advance that they get me the smallest tree they could find. I was passing by the bazaars. There were some tiny Christmas trees there, but I thought that Leshka would bring a Thumbelina. I'm going into the garage. Anyway, if I stand on a chair, I can reach the top of the lowest Christmas tree with my raised arm. Our male coworkers, they said they drank it. Executed before Christmas. So for some reason I felt bitter that I just waved my hand and went. I didn't know why I got on the bus and went to the orphanage. Of course, they wouldn't let me go any farther than the watch. After all, I had no prior arrangement with anyone. And passing by, the educator only threw that the secret of adoption is protected by the state. And I will never know what kind of family took my child in, and then a miracle happened. Anyway, I can't interpret it any other way. The old nanny who was mopping the floor left her mop and looked at me. Are you that stupid girl who swam out of before she abandoned the baby? Aya, do you remember me, even though I'm an old woman with a bad memory? I can tell you the truth, but I don't want you to run around in my generation. What are you talking about? I don't get it. Well, you won't complain to all the authorities that they cheated you for no reason that our bosses are in trouble. What about my girl? I got cold feet. I was cheated. She's dead. Your daughter is alive. The nanny squeezed the rag and wounded around the mop again. She's grown up all right. Not even sick at all. Only nobody took her in and adopted her. She grew up in these walls. She finished school and moved away. Where to? I guess I couldn't control my voice at that moment, because the woman on watch looked back at us. I don't know about that. You didn't give her a name, did you? If you gave up on her right away, why are you crying? It's too late now. Her name is Lily. Maybe she's married now. I was already crying. I would have come to my senses. I would have taken her. That's why the nurse said that different moms come here and make scandals. And our teachers have been beaten up. That's why we try to say that their children are no longer here. How am I gonna find her now? And here's a clue, she had a boy. And once they ran away from the orphanage together to a tattoo parlor, they beat a dragon and rose on her shoulder. They'd fought a lot, then the teachers. But she didn't remove the tattoo and probably wears it today. It's a hard life here, Mama. In winter, we barely managed to get the boiler room repaired. There was a glacier in the bedrooms, and our headmistress doesn't catch mice. The kids complain that they're cold, and she said get a second blanket. At home, I did not answer the questions of my husband's children. I lay down and turned my face to the wall. I could not imagine what my girl had become, because I had hardly seen her. For some reason, I remembered my own youth. It was cold in our dormitory at the university too. In my first year, in September, I lived alone in our local room. The students were sent to work on the collective farm, and we were left to clean the classrooms and the dean's office. I remember evenings when, having collected from all 5 beds green and blankets with crimson stripes around the edges, I folded under them with my teeth and warmed my hands over the electric stove. The stove was illegal. Cooking was supposed to be done on the only 3-burner electric stove on the floor. Only one of the burners could bring food to a boil. And you could not turn away, move away, go to get onions, salt. Everything was stolen from the pot. A piece of chicken, half a raw potato, so half a raw potato. Yesterday's applicants, we were still children. We had to get used to the fact that for potatoes we had to go to the market, to the other end of the city, and we would not see milk at all, because bottled milk in stores is bought up in 2 hours, and bottled in the evenings you can get only in the outskirts of the stores. And if someone from the dormitory wanted to make mashed potatoes and began to sip potatoes, he was snidely asked if you have milk. Usually the potatoes were just mashed with water and butter. What we ate then? In the morning we thinly sliced onions and poured mayonnaise on them and put them on a piece of bread. In the evenings we cooked chicken soup and occasionally from the scholarship allowed ourselves to go into dumplings. It's expensive, variable, but it's still crowded because the dumplings are delicious. We stand at the tail end. The lines are long. From time to time the cook comes over to them and we see what they hold in their hands. If it's mitten-sized, we hang it up. The line sighs disappointedly. If it's a colander, it's a sit-down. And those who are first in line now will get their portions. And me and my girlfriend will be at a table in a dark corner. You pour in your plate on the smoking dumplings. Half a cup of sour cream each to keep you satiated for a long time. My girl in kindergarten must have lived on hunger too. Then I remembered the library where I spent a lot of time during my school years. It occupied one wing of the Opera and Ballet Theater building, and in the other wing there was a choreographic school. The girls and boys there also lived in boarding school. I imagine how in the evenings these girls ran on the floor of dark staircases, tangled in down and shawl, because it's cold here. I saw it all as if it were his. Their shapely legs in point shoes, and their hair tightly tied at the back of their heads, and I could hear what they were saying in the bedrooms. And soon they'll be dancing the Nutcracker because Christmas is coming. What can we get ourselves for Christmas? There's no makeup in the stores. I mean, they sell mascara. It's a block of black stuff as hard as granite that you have to thaw out before you can put on makeup. It's not like now, when everyone's excited about you and you're excited about the furniture. From the gypsies who occasionally sweep with their skirts near the stores, you can get polished shadows or lipstick, even in the bluest and lilac colors. Under the dead man we buy perfume. They were magic at that time. You could perfume a sweater and then wash it dry. And there was still a faint odor. How much was there? Watercolors, with a lower odor, or Romeo and Juliet in Riga. 2. Boxed bottles on white silk. Juliet smells like jasmine. Just before the holiday, everyone in the group drops 50 cents each and raffles off a bottle of champagne that someone has gotten, because there is no champagne in the stores either. I remember taking my children to the theater and what a celebration it was for them. We saw Silva. We were sitting in the front row. One of the characters dropped a champagne glass and it shattered. And then the dancers come out. If they were wearing shoes. No, point shoes. The stage is tiny and the dancers have to waltz right into the shards. At the very last moment, one of the artists leaned over and in one movement all this glass with a comb in the palm of his hand. And then Boney M. They got into a fight, and Boney screamed. Careful, he has a new disease shaking. Max whispers to Mom, what 3 bitches he's got, where it's shorter. I covered my face and sobbing. The librarian looks on with laughter. And then Silva swung his black bow over us and feathers flew on our heads. That's the kind of theater lovers we were. I could never agree with those people who think that time flows slowly. For me, it was always galloping. I think I just took my kids to first grade. Here we are with parents standing under the office door and waiting to pick up our kids. We won't notice how 11 years will fly by, one of the moms said then. I didn't believe her, but she was right. Before we knew it, it was graduation night. And if with Max everything was solved, he just didn't care in what suit to go to the ball, then with Anna we chose different options for so long. In the end, we had 2 dresses for the ceremonial part of the blue puffy. Huffy daughter looked like a queen in this dress. And we also bought a small black dress, which was comfortable to dance at the disco. Anna said right away that she would go to New York. Max chose the law school in our city. I realized that my daughter and son's childhood was over. The chicks are leaving the nest, and that's the way it should be. But before we parted, I warned the children that we had an important conversation to have. I didn't inform my husband that I was going to tell Anna and Max. He'd long since given up on our first child. Blurred it out of his memory. To him it was just some unpleasant incident that happened in such and such a year. But I knew I'd be tormented for the rest of my life by the fact that I'd given up my child. So I honestly told my kids that they had an older sister. Except we'll probably never find her. I can't even tell you what she looks like, I said with infinite sadness. The only time I ever saw her, her hair was dark and her eyes were blue. But then she was a newborn baby, and who knows what she's like now? The only thing more or less accurate. On her shoulder, she has a tattoo of a dragon holding a rose in its mouth. Anna was amazed. Mom, but how did you decide to give up a child like that? Max and I were sick as children too, and you nursed us back to health. You cared for each one of us. It never occurred to you to get rid of us. That word "get rid of us" stabbed me. And didn't Daddy object? The daughter went on. Did he have to convince you that everything was manageable? It's all treatable now. Your dad, I asked bitterly. He made me do it, actually. I've been told from all sides that it's hard. A sick child. What was I supposed to give birth to? According to the doctors, would put an end to our family. We would never be able to live a normal life again. Everyone said the right and reasonable thing. But I almost immediately began to regret my decision. But it was too late to fix anything. I had been lied to and told that my little girl had been adopted. And it turns out that this did not happen. And she grew up in the cold, stuffy walls of the orphanage. I bet she wasn't fed and abused. She suffered because she wasn't wanted. The people closest to her have given up on her. Anna finally realized how hard it was for me to say all this. She ran over and hugged me. It's okay, she said. Fate will still be on our side. We'll find Lily, I'm sure. If I graduated from law school, I'll have a better chance of finding out about her, Max encouraged. All I could do was cover my face with my hands and cry. Anna went to New York, enrolled in college. Soon enough, she got married. Her husband has his own slot machine business. Once a year, I go to visit her. She has a big apartment in the new district. The house has a gated courtyard where they don't let outsiders in. And in the apartment, in addition to the rooms, there is even a place for a small pond and a mini pool where the turtles swim. And Anna herself now looks stylish, wears expensive things, building a career. I realize that she will never return to our city, and that if I live to old age, I can hardly count on her as an assistant who will take care of me. I'm happy for my daughter, she's doing well, and my son-in-law and I have a great relationship. But essentially, I've lost Anna. She's slowly becoming more and more of a stranger with her own agenda and interests. Well, that's life, and I'm okay with that. Max graduated from law school and joined the police force, but it wasn't an easy road. There were always conflicts with his superiors. In our small provincial town, connections and money decide everything. After a couple of cases, Max quit. 2 cars collided at the intersection. One of them from Tost, so that she crashed into the concrete porch of the store. The elderly driver died on the spot when they began to reconstruct the picture of what had happened from the CCTV cameras. It became clear who was responsible for the accident. The son of the deputy of the local Duma flew his car at a huge, unacceptable speed for the city and did not think to slow it down even at the intersection, so he rammed into an old 8. But it was the dead driver who was found guilty of the accident. Allegedly, he should have given way. The young son of a wealthy family paid for the funeral. That's how he got off. The second case was about the same. Drunken officials on a motorboat went for a walk on one of the islands and managed to crash into an inflatable boat with a whole family in it, a father and mother and a child. The head of the family was injured, fell overboard, and his body was not found until several days later. The officials got away with it. The motor driver received a suspended sentence, and again the dead man was found guilty. Allegedly, he'd been drinking and failed to yield the right of way. "Can't be an investigator anymore," Max said afterward. "I'm doing my own research. I know who is to blame in this or that case. And the blame falls on completely different people. That's enough. I quit. And my son went to work as a security guard in a store, even though it didn't pay much. And the profession of security guard became, to put it mildly, not prestigious. Max still hasn't gotten married, even though my girlfriends tried to match him with their daughters. And I don't insist that my son rush to have a family. Let it happen in its own time. And I divorced my husband. I just couldn't take it anymore. The loneliness of being alone together. We had completely lost understanding of each other, and what filled my soul with bitterness did not touch him at all. At the registry office, we were persuaded to delay our decision. You've lived together for so many years. Do you really want to be alone now, when old age is already staring you in the face? Your children will have their own lives anyway. Would you be able to support each other? We heard you, but I insisted on a divorce. We split the apartment, got a 2-bedroom for our 3 and little family. The son took his father's side. They were always close. And now I have my own corner in the former dormitory. A 10-square-meter room with a tiny hallway. On one side of the bathroom, on the other, a kind of kitchen, a cubbyhole, which can hardly fit one person. But the center of the city opposite the stores. Next to the park and the second floor. I'm getting ready for old age. I won't have to climb stairs if the elevator goes out, or walk far for bread and kefir. I've resigned myself to the fact that I'll live out my life alone. Suddenly Max called me and almost shouted into the phone, "Mommy, she's found. The girl with the dragon and the rose." Lily sat idly in the back room. She was sure that nothing good would come of her attempt to sneak a few nuts in the store. Most likely, the guard would call the police and she would be fined something. Her name will be on the police report. Sooner or later, Herbert will find her, and when he does, he'll force her back into his house and beat her half to death, and a restraining order. The guard didn't say another word. He stood in the doorway of the back room and was definitely afraid Lily would get in somewhere. Sometimes female voices called out to him, but he just waved them away. And half an hour later, a middle-aged woman came into the little room. She was very pale and looked at Lily with her eyes, a shaken person. The last thing she looked like was an angry shopkeeper, and Lily didn't know what to think. "What's your name?" asked the woman. Lily gave her first and last name. After all, there was no point in hiding them. The woman flinched slightly. "Are you married?" Lily wanted to answer was, but the woman did not wait for those words. "You had a different maiden name." Hurriedly she asked, and when Lily named her, the stranger covered her eyes. "Did you grow up in an orphanage?" she said in a tone of assertion. "How do you know?" Lily wondered. "We need to talk. Max, please see that no one enters this room." The woman sat down on the chair the guard had placed for her. She was quiet for a few minutes. "I don't know where to start," she admitted. "We could do a test. I guess that's what it's gonna take. But I'm pretty sure I'm your birth mother. You may never forgive me. I can already see that life hasn't spoiled you, but you me. If you're not hard right, you'll regret it if you don't do everything you could have expected, Lily." But not what happened to her. The guard didn't send her to the police station. Instead, a woman sat across from her and begged her to listen. "Speak up," Lily said. The woman started from afar. She talked about how she had married without much love, how she had gotten caught up in the routine of everyday life when she was still young and wanted a thrill, how she got into extreme sports and achieved something. And then the records were a time of pregnancy, and the doctors assumed that the child is terminally ill. "I waited many years," the woman said. "If it is impossible to correct the mistake, then at least to find you and apologize. My husband and I committed a betrayal, and we betrayed a defenseless child, so it is impossible to justify us. Then we had normal, healthy children. We raised them. Max, your brother, Anna is married and lives in New York. My husband and I recently separated. What he and I did was forever between us. So now I'm alone. And if there's anything I can do for you." Lily was silent. She was confused and didn't know what to say. "Your life has been very difficult." The woman still kept her eyes from her or shrugged her shoulders. "But of course, there is not much fun in an orphanage, although children can find something good in any environment. Don't be so hard on yourself. As you can see, I grew up in spite of everything, got an education. I was even on my own 2 feet for a while. And the fact that things have fallen apart in my life now, it's not your fault. Maybe I don't have the right to ask." The woman looked at Lily from head to toe for the 100th time. "But you have a place to live." "I don't right now," Lily answered bluntly. "But I hope it's only temporary and everything will eventually fall into place." "Come with me," said the one who called herself her mother. "My apartment is more than modest, of course, but at least I have a roof over my head. We have much to tell each other. You, Max, on the other hand, I would ask you not to say anything to your father. It's been over for him for years, and he doesn't need to know." That night, Lily and her mother couldn't sleep for a long time. Her mother had fed the girl enough, laid out a cot for her, and put fresh linen on it. But they talked and talked even though the hands of the clock ran far past midnight. Lily told about her years of life in the orphanage, about her friends, about her teachers, evil and kind, about how she had become a landscape designer to create beauty with her own hands. Her mother touched her hand. "I have a villa. It's yours now." "Thank you," Lily whispered. About Herbert, she told briefly it was too painful to remember. But she confessed that she was afraid he would find her. "You have a brother now. He'll be able to protect you." "Well, I don't know," Lily said incredulously. "I don't want to have to protect you from my ex-husband. He's got a lot of power and a lot of money." The next day at the family council, they decided that Lily would go to the villa and live there a little rest, come to her senses, and then it would be clear. Although the mother no longer doubted that she had found her daughter, she still once again traveled this way and visited the children's home, and in the orphanage where Lily grew up. She went there with pictures of the girl. And now, when it was no longer about the interests of a minor girl, the educators were more cooperative. It turned out that this is the same little girl, which parents abandoned immediately after her birth. The situation was finally clarified by a DNA test. Lilia was recovering quickly. The bruises her ex-husband had left on her memory came together. In the hospital, they removed the plaster from her broken arm. The girl enjoyed gardening, planting flowers, caring for plants, noticing how the small garden was transformed under her hands. Neighbors began to ask her for help. Lily believed that even here, in a foreign city, she would be able to do what she loved and get back on her feet. Herbert finally picked up her trail and appeared in the city. But Max, using his old police connections, managed to get a hold of him. "If I ever see you near your sister again, I'll have Sasha for a long time," he promised. "You weren't shy about raising your hand to Lily. And we're not shy. You'll probably be found in possession of drugs. And that's a lot of time." And Mom got a call from the doctor she was hopelessly in love with. Kelly said, "Let's meet you somewhere. I've been wanting to talk to you for a long time." Kelly couldn't invite him to her tiny room. There was no place to sit. They set up a meeting at a cafe in the park near Kelly's house. It was a rainy and cold day, and it suited the woman's mood. Until now, her rare encounters with Ethan had been like a drug of happiness and hope at first, and then he'd be gone for months, if not years. And that was how it was now. The last time they'd seen each other was several years ago. Kelly knew she had grown old, but she accepted her age with dignity. Didn't get along unnecessarily, which made quite a few older women ridiculous. Kelly always dressed tastefully. She didn't own many things, but they all suited her. A good haircut, a light scarf around her neck, a light-colored coat. But most importantly, her gaze had changed. It didn't have that tragic note that you always have. "Something good?" Ethan asked. Kelly smiled slightly. "It's a long story, but you called me here for a reason, so there was a reason. Let's start with you. I just wanted to see you." Ethan shrugged. "Somehow I ended up alone." "But you've been alone before." Kelly wondered. "As far as I know, your parents live in another city with your brother." That's right. But I guess when you're young, you don't feel loneliness too much. On the contrary, you even want to be at work all day. Everyone needs you there. In the evening, you think about one thing: to come and collapse in bed, and no one to disturb you until morning. But time goes by and things change. I'm almost out of surgery now. Hospital entry is as bad as conspiracy in the royal household. And my eyesight is failing. It's time for eye surgery, so that's the end of my youthful enthusiasm. Now I come home after a day's work like everyone else. And there are nights when I don't feel like going home. I know I'll be greeted by dark apartment windows. I've had a lot of patients, but you're the only one who's ever asked me about me. Everyone else was only interested in me as a doctor. They started telling me about their illnesses, complaining, asking for advice, asking for things. And now I think that no one ever needed me as a person. Ethan stared straight ahead. Kelly was silent. It was no use telling him that she'd loved him for years, unrequitedly. And he hadn't noticed. Would it make any difference now? And you, he continued, tell me about yourself. Before your eyes were always sad. Now they're bright. Something good has happened. It's a story that sounds like a fairy tale. And Kelly told him what she'd never told him before, how she'd lost her daughter, and now she found her again. And she didn't care what her old friend thought of her now. Ethan was shaken. I can imagine the burden she'd lived with for so many years. How's Lily doing now? She's fine. If you need my help. No, she's almost recovered, and now she wants to get back on her feet. I signed the house over to her, and she's making a real piece of paradise out of it. She knows that I would do anything for her, that I'm deeply remorseful and guilty. But I have to give her time, and for now I'm not imposing. She has to see for herself if she can accept me as her mother. You are a wise man. Ethan touched Kelly's arm, and you can forgive me. And she returned the chin. For what? Well, I'm a complete fool. I've noticed things. But at the time, I valued my freedom more than anything. And now I'd like to make up for it, if it's not too late. 2 months later, Kelly and Ethan's modest wedding was celebrated at the old country house. There was a wonderful starfall that night, and everyone could make a wish and believe it would come true.
Subscribe and click the bell.
If we compare Nancy's childhood with the way most of her peers grow up, we can say that the girl was lucky. She studied in England, graduating from a boarding school for girls. It was a first-class institution. Compulsory and elective subjects, sports and excursions, beautiful surroundings and beautiful uniforms. How did Nancy get there? Her father worked in a division of a Russian bank, a prominent position. Nancy's mom had a vocation as a housewife. She couldn't imagine anything else worth doing as a woman in this life. Perhaps she should have been born in the Orient, and some sheikh there would have carried her in his arms, for she was beautiful, delicately charming, and her home was a world she did not want to leave. All those homemade napkins, plates, and pads were infinitely important to her. She could spend hours searching online stores for something that would make the apartment even cozier. Her father didn't come far for dinner, but every dinner turned into a feast. Some meals took Molly hours to prepare. And all that china, tablecloths, wine, expensive glasses created the ambience, so to speak. But when Nancy was at home, she felt older than that. The girl's mother so helpless outside these walls. May beautiful hair, silk dress, and jewelry may not take her eyes off her, but if this well-groomed house cat had found herself on the streets, would she have survived there? Nancy, thanks to her friends, teachers, and herself first of all, understood today's day much better. She had passed her driver's license early. She was going to graduate high school and live apart from her parents. But then disaster struck and her plans changed abruptly. Actually, disaster is a bit of a mouthful. There were changes at the bank, downsizing, and her father was fired. But for him, who didn't expect it, the sky fell to the ground. For Mom, of course. She also explained later in a whisper to Nancy, as if Dad could hear from the back room. But Molly's mom was terribly afraid of traumatizing his psyche. She explained that there was a great grief in the family. that her father still had some big money that he had to pay back. And at a time like this, everyone needs to be together, because there is no one to support the father. They are going back to Russia, and now the father will work there. Nancy did not remember her homeland. She only realized that her life would change completely. Maybe if she had been older, she would have borne it harder. But youth is greedy for impressions, and Nancy didn't mind seeing the world. It was a shame to part with her friends, but she thought she'd go to a school like this one back in her hometown. Yeah, now things had changed more than she could have imagined. Finding herself in an ordinary Russian school, Nancy felt like an alien. The first time it was so hard for her that in the evenings, shutting herself in her room, she cried, something she had long since gotten used to. Only when she was very small had she shed tears like that. After Nancy, evaluating her, in general, not bad class and girls not at all mean, moderately mocking them, and up to passionately curious, and boys who clumsily tried to woo the English girl who spoke with an accent, and most of all the teacher of Russian language and literature, for whom they did not come up with a better banal definition of a teacher from God. But that's what everyone called her. She loved both her subject and her children selflessly. In short, after a while everything at Nancy's was back to normal. Not like at home. They returned to the very apartment from which they had left for England, and Molly, looking around confusedly, the dwelling seemed to her unusually uncozy and cramped. And there was still all the stuff they'd brought with them. Molly realized that there was nothing new to buy. Her husband didn't work for a while. Later he took a low-level job in banking again. The neighborhood, all young people, and he started drinking, and in a way he remembered his past faster than his wife, and realized that expensive cognacs and the like were no longer for him. After all, if you drink every day and not just occasionally, you will spend a fortune on elite drinks. And where to get it? Hot drinks were required every day. And if there was nothing at home, it was a dead evening. Dad figured it out real quick. Maybe he had a family history of alcoholics. Molly, on the other hand, was genuinely lost. She bought seemingly familiar groceries, but maybe he gave her only nothing for the household. And money that should have been stretched over a week was gone in a day. Instead of promising that things would get better, my husband said to cook something simple, like dumplings. You should have seen the sight. When in the evening at dinner my father sits at the table, there is an honorable bottle of vodka, and my mother comes in with that confused smile, which is now as if glued to her face, and puts on the table a soup full of steaming dumplings. She made them herself, yes, from 3 kinds of meat. But from her point of view, she has absolutely nothing to eat herself, because those salads and those fruits, which are useful for beauty, are now relegated to the realm of legend. Mom had to master oatmeal and apples bought from grandmothers at the market. But what tormented her even more was that before she had lived in name, her husband was everything to her. Now there seemed to be no one to talk to. Alex came, ate and slept, and fell asleep early before 10 o'clock, and at night he was tormented by insomnia. He would shuttle to the kitchen and back, looking for pills for his head, and then pour himself a shot again, because he couldn't sleep. And they you rush, you won't be able to work, he explained to his wife. When she shrank to the left, exactly sick asked him maybe enough. In the morning, the father got up, detached in age, put on the main shirt, which Molly served, shaking hands to tie his tie. At the bank, he was already careful not to show it to customers. Nancy missed the moment when her parents decided to separate. They never fought in front of her. Her mother felt that her daughter should not be psychologically traumatized. Nancy was appealing to a new world for herself, and the final exams were ahead. Clara practiced with her additionally at her home, and did not charge a penny for it. In that sense, she was a fossilized element. But the biggest shock Nancy had to endure was when the last exam was passed, and quite decently. It seemed to the girl that now she was going to have a series of holidays. There would be some kind of present for successful completion of school. Then the birthday of 18 years, Then she and the girls will apply to the university. And then Dad and Mom call her into Dad's office, close the door behind them. Daddy doesn't look like himself. In the time they've been back from England, he's aged 20 years. Mommy doesn't look like herself either. She's as beautiful, gentle, and well-groomed as a house cat. But there's a nervousness about her. He twirls the pen, then puts it away, then picks it up again and starts twirling it. "We want you to get married in a month," Mom said. And again, "Please." It was so wild and impossible that Nancy asked, "And if you could, spell it again." "The thing is, I'm getting married soon too," Mom said. Nancy didn't know what to do. Clear her ears, support her dropping jaw, cover her face with her hands. Mom explained. She had met a man. Or rather, a man had met her. Mom always took the second role. She didn't say, "I've always met a man." I was introduced, beckoned, proposed to, charmed. Nancy thought once again that in the East she would not have been valued. So Mama was met and charmed to the point of madness by her. So she was getting married. Mama didn't add, and Nancy didn't ask. She just assumed Mama would have a life like before, or maybe even better. Sailing caviar, silver roots. In short, the family was breaking up, and Nancy urgently needed a place to go, to shelter her daughter in a safe harbor. "Mom, this is the 20th century." Nancy was so stunned that she almost forgot the Russian words. She wanted to switch to English. "I'm going to college. I'm moving to a dorm or an apartment with girls, and I'm going to visit my dad. Your boyfriend, as I understand, does not want to see me." Mom patiently sighed and shook her beautiful lips. Then she explained she had pulled up all her connections, kin to 3 generations, grandniece, great-niece, great-nephew, stepdaughters. But she'd found an absolutely marvelous match. 39 years old, single, rich, already seen Nancy's picture and invited to dinner on Sunday. Nancy thought that if Daddy drank, then Mommy must have been into drugs, and not exactly light, maybe even heavy. An overdose. "You'll be home on Sunday." Mom folded her arms across her chest, thin white fingers, manicure, stylish rings. Nancy was going on a bike ride with the girls this weekend. Now the plans seemed to be shutting down. Of course, it was possible to run away from the apartment unnoticed in the morning and rush to the girls and ride already from them. But suddenly the weather turned bad, as if it were at the same time with Mom. And on Saturday my father's blood pressure went up, and to leave him to listen to my mother's lamentations, if she ran away. Anyway, the girl stayed. And as in the good old days, she and her mother prepared Sunday dinner and set the oval table with the finest embroidered tablecloth, and laid out the dishes according to the rules. And when the bell rang and her mother threw her daughter out to open the door, Nancy realized to hell with the bicycle, to hell with the girls, and the institution, for that matter. Because the Michael her mom had chosen was only ironically a high-end furniture salesman. He should have been starring in blockbuster movies or gracing the covers of men's magazines. Or Nancy shook his head, once again replacing the English vocabulary in it with Russian. And he was not only handsome, but also charming and smart. In short, Nancy didn't even marry with a whistle. It was a sort of teleportation. Today she is a schoolgirl, teaching graphing functions and sleeping under her favorite climate plate. Tomorrow she's a young wife in her own home. Nancy ordered prints of her wedding photos, framed them and hung them on the wall so she could look at them 100 times a day and remind herself that it wasn't all a dream. She didn't turn out anywhere near the kind of hostess my mom did, but she didn't need to be. Michael didn't demand a fine table or an impeccably put-together house. But he loved to travel, and they often went somewhere, mostly abroad, to Europe. That's where Nancy's language test came in handy. Michael's command of English was much worse, but still decent. True, their trips were not purely recreational. Business, you know. Suppliers of wood compote. Try saying that name. Maybe it's the only one on the planet that grows the headsets that belong in a palace, not in the homes of mere mortals. Michael was in love with his work, sensing that he could get some rarity. He could go anywhere and anytime, even to the end of the world. There were times when her husband was away on business all day, but Nancy was never bored. They always stayed in hotels that were miniature cities. They had everything in them, and new acquaintances happened every time by themselves. And how many young women did Nancy envy when Michael was around? More than once or twice. The women would try to recall the wrinkles, the forehead. I think I saw him in some movie. He wasn't a musician, or maybe a singer. How many countries did they travel to? How many things did they see? Nancy grinned. And then, if it hadn't been for Cindy investigator Cindy Jabrailova, she wouldn't have been able to glue her life together from the shards. Yeah, that's too bad. What's broken will never be whole again. But this damn survival instinct makes you collect these shards. Try them on each other. Try to attach them. Glue them, realizing that just one easy movement is enough to cost fate. As they say, a little finger to move. Cindy knows that now Nancy has a different name, different paperwork. What made her turn a blind eye? The parents don't know where Nancy is now. All they know is that she's alive. Mom, drowning in her new happy life, diving headfirst into it, and even with her hair up high, is content with that too. Father has drunk himself completely to death. Sometimes Nancy calls him to say I'm doing well. And Camille, Nancy's daughter, is 12 years old, but she's got a lot of self-importance. She's 16 too. Will you even come to my funeral? Dad asks, like, jokingly. But they both know he doesn't have long to live. My liver's gone to hell. I wish I had that much to drink. What if I ask you the same question? Nancy holds his breath. You don't say anything. It's scary to imagine such a thing. So do I. What are you comparing? Generational change is natural. Fuck you with those words. Nancy hangs up the phone. But Dad realizes it's the snowiest thing in the world. I love you. After leaving the phone booth, Nancy walks into a bar. On principle, she can't afford to spend too much. But not now. She orders a cognac, a double shot, refuses the lemon, peanuts, and other nonsense the bartender offers. She will drink, sitting at the nearly empty bar in the darkest corner. The waiter will come over to light a candle on the table, but she will make the gesture don't. And he'll leave her alone. Maybe they'll stay in this town for a while, as long as no one sniffs about them. The daughter even liked the apartment. What are they renting on quiet old street? There's a bakery on the first floor. You can get a cup of coffee there in the morning. And at nights the female sleeps soundly and doesn't see the cockroaches that scurry across the kitchen floor, not ineradicable. Nancy has experienced everything and almost gives up. Evelyn will leave for school in the morning, and Nancy will open her laptop and sit down to work, and maybe pour themselves another shot of cognac. Heredity, good sirs, and life in the realm of horror, and the glass is already empty. Michael did a lot of charity work. It's a badge of honor among the well-to-do. Some may have felt sorry for the money, but didn't want to be judged by others. And for some, it became a need. Michael chose a children's rehabilitation center. It was something between a boarding school and an orphanage. It's where the kids went. In layman's terms, from dysfunctional families, they lived there for a month, 2 or 3 months. They were treated, fed, tried to learn something. As a rule, these kids were very poor in their studies. For some kids during this time, everything changed for the better in the family. Parents would get coded, get a job. Then the kids would come home. If parents continued to drink, stab each other, and there was nothing to hang a mouse on in the refrigerator, the kids were sent to an orphanage. The rehabilitation center Michael saw looked extremely shabby. Over the years that the businessman was his patron, the institution has been transformed. Renovation, a huge plasma TV palace, in the game rooms toys, and a playground. On the walls were now painted fairy tale characters. Fresh fruit appeared on the tables, and the headmistress greeted Michael with such reverence. That's right. He was an Arab sheik, and she was his latest beggar. Nancy, too, had the joy of participating in all this. Many times she went to the stores to pick out a toy for one of the birthday boys, herself a dress-up doll, or a huge bear, or a wind-up train. And her new friends advised her to give Michael a baby of his own. He'd be a wonderful father. Nancy was a little afraid. Her mother told her that she had carried her only pregnancy extremely hard. She was lying in the bed. She was turned inside out almost until the birth, and she did not know what she wanted parents to die. There were moments when the second option seemed preferable, especially if it came right away. So when she tested positive, Nancy literally prepared herself to wait for the end. But pregnancy caused her only 3 inconveniences. She constantly wanted to sleep, and Nancy hated the smell of cinnamon and peppermint. It's nothing to take into account. Looking ahead, a persistent aversion to the memory persisted for life. Unlike the chicken, Michael asked if Nancy wanted to give birth in a private maternity hospital, but the young woman chose a regular one. At the district hospital, everyone said that the doctors there were very good, experienced, and even the most complicated cases ended well. But when 3 days before Nancy put the word, it was paid, it is yes, and the doctors were discussing labor options, the young woman was in favor of a C-section with both hands. It seemed less scary to her. Later she realized that there are no easy surgeries in principle, and if the anesthetic injection is delayed even 10 minutes, you will feel like a little run over by a train. But Galka was lying next to her, the living example, skinny as a wall. She tried to get up sideways from the very beginning. I didn't moan or complain. In general, in that run on the floor was a lot of operated and cheerful elderly nurse at 6 o'clock shouted in the corridor. But what? Go wash. That was all secondary, though. The important thing was that Nancy had a baby girl, pretty as a doll. You could enter her in the Miss Baby contest. The name was Michael's choice, and he wouldn't let Nancy settle on any name suggested. Nonsense, mother, he said gently. As for luxury names, they used to be given to their children by the blatant, and now by soap opera fans, and the folk versions. Before, Daddy was asked to find a baby a prettier name, like the gentleman. Let's focus on noble families. Let's keep up the good manners. Nancy, while she was reading to her daughter, didn't listen too much to what her husband was saying. In fact, she didn't care as long as she didn't get sick. Michael hired an au pair. An elderly, pleasant woman came for a few hours a day, made the house cozy, filled the refrigerator. And it seemed to Nancy that even though she had warm conditions, she was still a zombie compared to the other women. Evelyn lay awake at night like in the movie From Dusk Till Dawn. Nancy wandered around the house with her so the little girl wouldn't disturb her husband. And during the day, Nancy went from room to room with ampoule eyes and often clung to corners. Her parents would come over to see their granddaughter. Strange, and I was sure you'd have a boy, said the father. At least one in our family. I thought the ultrasound said so. They're often wrong. I like your house, Mom said. It has a face. Michael is good. He appreciates things so much. He chooses them so carefully. Every table has a personality. It's all the rage these days to have apartments as impersonal as spaceships. It looks like an astronaut is about to swim into the room, push open the door of a secret closet, and pull out a spare spacesuit. But Nancy could not, like her mother, turn into a housefly, or rather, a smokefly. And when Alex grew up, Nancy started drawing. It was kind of unbeknownst to her. She'd never been to art school or even a studio before. And then her soul asked for creativity. Nancy bought some paint-by-numbers pictures of brightly colored parrots and a ship against the sunset. Mom had never heard of this kind of painting before. With a twinkle in her eye, she decided that her daughter had awakened a talent. Well, it's all right if you slept a long time. Vaughn, Susan Boyle, at 47 years old, went on stage, sang with an angelic voice, and everyone went down. I mean, they stood up and gave her a standing ovation. Maybe there was a repin in her daughter too, and life was finally pushing him around. Nancy was amused. She tried to explain to her mom it was like embroidering a pattern. But for one thing, Mom was in a hurry to get to the hairdresser's, and she didn't have time to listen. Second, she wanted to believe in miracles. And then Nancy brought home a third canvas and small plastic cans of paint. It was going to be beautiful, a winter night, a starry sky, a hut with a lighted window, a black forest in the distance, and a black fence. Pysanka was playing in the playpen with her cubs. Nancy picked up the brush, but in that instant she stopped, realizing that the clearly defined borders on the diagram had been drawn, and the numbers had changed shape, merging into something else. She drew quickly. Her hand was wildly accurate. Not once did the brush waver. She didn't even have to look at the numbers if she read them from the jar. And at the same time, she experienced a feeling that had never come to her before. That joy and awe, bordering on fear, that convinced her subconscious that something was being born from beneath my hands. Something more than I could. Still, she felt dizzy, and God knows how it would have ended. But in fact, it had run out of paint. 2 cans of black and blue were empty, and the rest stood almost untouched. Nancy, shaking her head. What a winter! What a cottage! There was no cabin in sight. Before her on the canvas was the corner of some dirty barn, and a boy thin to the blue, with bell-bottomed, dirty hair. She had never been able to draw a boy cat, would not have been able to draw much less a man. Nancy flung the canvas away from her, tossing it like a living thing. She didn't hang this painting on the wall. She slid it into a corner in her studio, covered it with sheets of absorbent cotton. But painting was becoming a need for Nancy, moreover, an addiction. The kind of withdrawal that happens without cigarettes, without the internet. With Nancy, without something to leave a mark on and something to leave a mark on. She began to catch herself sketching some scenes in pencil on wallpaper, in the margins of magazines, with her finger on the window. They had a girl like Kathy at school. Every time a lesson turned out to be boring, Kathy drew on the last pages of her notebooks, and drew exclusively high-heeled shoes, stiletto heels, high as stilts. The shoes were rose-colored or bowed with leopard or snake bows, but Kathy was drawn to graceful ladies' shoes. It was an excuse for her to keep her hands and mind busy. What about Nancy? What about shoes and bows? She herself was frightened by the drawings, as if something was appearing on the other side of the sheet that was staring her in the eye. Some male faces, sweat, compressed lips, a piercing gaze, possessed, devoid of pity, hands clenched into fists, some slums, and a screaming woman. Nancy made an appointment with a therapist. He was a short man with a red beard. Nancy later learned that he hated women. It happens. He always blames women for everything. They go away after their sessions, snot on their fist, and ashes on their heads. Nancy, Rick considered it a minor case. Enroll in an art studio, he advised. Let them teach you to paint what you like, and don't you try to do some housework. You must have neglected your husband with his laws. There was a group of amateur and novice painters in town. In the summer, we'd make arrangements and go out together on plein air. It was noisy and fun. The attention of spectators was not embarrassing, and the works were then brought to mind and exhibited. Nancy joined this company, left her nanny to the loom, and went with the artists to paint the half-ruined manor house. She hoped that in the presence of other people her hand, which had a life of its own, would behave decently. Everything started out splendidly. The young people were given a tour of the manor, fed a hot lunch in the school canteen, and led to a clearing where the desired view opened up. "Create, Nancy, please," said Nancy to herself. She had all she needed: paint, canvas, and a shift in her mind. She began to paint as carefully as if she were drunk. But there was no way she could show it. Great. Already the walls were outlined, plaster shaken, windows without panes, empty dark openings, tall grass that joined the dying house. Nancy started late to pour. She wanted to finish sooner to get away from the canvas, as if it was cold here, near it. But take 2 steps to the side, and it's a hot summer day again. "Oh," said Jenna from over my shoulder. "Who do you have?" Jenna was sort of the unspoken leader of their group. She'd been drawing for a long time. Sketching was quick and easy. She was clearly talented. Now she lived behind the artists and watched to see who was doing what. Nancy looked at her work and barely refrained from forcing again your mother. Yes, it was an old gentleman's house, perfectly rendered. Only there, it was by no means the height of day in the painting, but early twilight and black window openings ruled. And in the far right someone was there. Someone standing in the depths of the room barely recognizable, and in the darkness only the eyes were clearly visible. Maybe the last light was falling on them. The eyes attracted and beckoned. Jenna was silent for a few seconds. "It's kind of creepy," she said. "Maybe you do not only draw, but also horror stories. What then? We will sell these pictures that we paint nowadays. And you know, but don't take offense, I wouldn't buy yours. I think if it hung in my room overnight, those eyes would glow." Changed her last name, middle name. She kept her name. True, no man ever called her Nancy. But Nancy was what was left of her old life. She wanted to get a license to carry at least a limited firearm. It was vital, and she was saving up the money. The only thing was to make sure it wasn't to the detriment of her posture. In the meantime, she went to the shooting range. At first she had to drive quite far, but then she got lucky. There was a park near their house, and there suddenly opened a small shooting gallery, which worked every day, even on weekends. At first, the owner was surprised by it unspeakably. Boys came to him, and sometimes girls and men came in, amusing themselves or proving to themselves that they are still wow. But this strange woman, who came here almost every day, and every time took a rifle with such a look, as if it was the main thing in her life. At first she was a private, a beginner, and often missed very often. Then the holes in the target began to get closer and closer to the black center, until finally they began to converge there and merge into each other. One day another regular at the shooting range asked Nancy, "Are you an athlete or just nuts?" She didn't answer anything, just looked at him intently. About a week after that they found themselves near each other again, in a small pavilion. This uncle was inferior to Nancy in marksmanship, but not by much. "Have you got any money?" he asked carelessly between two shots. "Do you want to rob?" she inquired, noting the different tone of voice. Now he was talking. "Hard like that. Think about asking a second time, have you bought anything for yourself yet?" the uncle asked. "But there are decent traumatics. We're just looking at them." Nancy, testing, looked at him. "I mean, maybe you want something more serious," he asked nonchalantly. "That's why I'm wondering how much you're looking for." Nancy put the rifle down and nodded at the door. "Let's go out and talk." Christina knew her lover had a wife. Her heart ached, but it was bearable for now. "I am a modern woman." That was the mantra. Perhaps repeating it 200 times would make it easier. But there's a wife out there in her own world. Home, baby, pacifiers, diapers. The wife will be there, and Christina will be here, and everything's fine. The chances of them crossing paths were practically nil. In the big city with the lifestyle Nancy led. Ugh, what kind of fossil name is she? No common acquaintances. Christina recently moved to a new neighborhood, bought a studio. She's a designer, adds charm to faceless housing. Roughly speaking, she makes a little candy out of nothing. She and Michael are past and future. Does he have any Marie Antoinette tricks? She's got tomorrow. In the mornings, Christina went to the window where the sun poured in. No curtains. 24th floor, with only the sky above and the birds at arm's length. Soon something will be invented, and it will be possible to open the window to fly with the birds. That's not to say Christina didn't dream of what could be, but all dreams extended to the short term. Michael said tomorrow, we will go to a concert, to an exhibition, to a restaurant. He realized Christina in four walls to lock up ridiculous as a bird sometimes sounded. We'll fly to the sea or go on a cruise always, no longer than a week. Christina didn't guess. She knew that at home Michael talked about business trips and suppliers. And Nancy, busy with the babies, didn't give a damn where he was going. The head assistant came in every day. Christina was not the kind of girl for whom luxury and happiness are equaled. She valued impressions above all else, and if standing on board of a cruise ship, she stopped with delight. Admiring the northern lights, she, in general, it did not care whether her cabin was luxurious or not. Working with interiors and things, she was at the same time as if she was above it, honoring the power of nature, works of art, human feelings. However, Michael was not stingy at all. He gave her gifts very often. Christina's apartment and closet were replenished with many beautiful things, and she, in her most secret dreams, saw that one day he would buy a house in the woods by the lake. A house of wood and glass unlike anything her imagination had created. A house not even from the 21st century, but probably from the 22nd. The only thing that was incomprehensible about Michael was his attitude toward children. It was logical to think that he wouldn't leave Nancy because they had a daughter. But he never spoke to Evelyn, never mentioned her name. There wasn't a single picture of Michael with a baby girl in his arms in his phone. One time when Christina started questioning him, he asked her back, "Why would you do that? Are you trying to tell me you're seriously interested in my baby or jealous of me? You can't love her. She's my wife's daughter. Just don't go playing all goofy and fawning over pictures of the girl. The truth is, you wish she wasn't here. That's it. It's been like that ever since." But Michael talked about these parish children willingly and a lot. He talked about the new girls and boys at the rehabilitation center. He often went to see the kids, mentioned when he had managed to arrange someone's fate. It was all incomprehensible. But Michael had never fully opened his soul to anyone, and Christina only had to put up with the brackets of the man she loved. This week he told her again. A weekend away to the seaside. He never gave her much notice. At least she didn't have to think about anything. Tickets, hotels all appeared exactly by themselves, as if by magic. The only question Christina had was how many days to take things for. Of course, it was inconvenient. It was not uncommon to have to explain force majeure to clients, sorry, humbly, without going into details. The lover called. I can't refuse. Michael never talked about the house, although he often remarked in passing that they should not hide anything from each other. But he was hiding a great deal. Christina had realized it that very evening by the sea. Hell knows why this trip had turned out so well. Only 3 days absolutely and out of season. November and Russia. What to do in Russia in November by the sea? In a small hotel where students should live because it is about to close for the winter. In the meantime, there is a heater like a breeze, and for entertainment, counting the flies that died between the frames. But these 3 days have been crazy, beautiful. While it was light, Michael and Christina wandered along the shore and went far beyond all the wild beaches and the sea that doesn't care that the world is in the month of fall. The sea, which hadn't lost an ounce of its charms, lavished them with gifts that there was no one to collect now. All these shells are refugees of the depths. Christina could pore over them for hours. They sat in a cafe on the deserted, almost waterfront, or on the adjacent street, where in summer there is no crowding. The menu was sparse. Maybe the hosts did not expect guests at all, but they received Christina and Michael not even as guests, but as distant relatives, perhaps. They carried everything they could treat themselves to, and fish fried for themselves, and homemade wine, and bubbles, and buttery cheburiks, which a minute ago were grumbling in the pans. Michael tasted wine and invariably took a bottle with him. If it was a clear, starry night, they stood on the balcony for long periods of time. It overlooked the forest. There was nothing to fear that anyone would see cold, but they could get back into their blankets. They drank wine from the simple granite glasses that were in the room with the wine, and the huge southern stars, especially bright from the light frost, were moving away and closer, almost touching their faces. And if it rained, they drank wine in bed and listened to the noise outside the window. And there was the safest harbor in the world between the blanket and Michael's body. Christina did not breathe, and this harbor happiness overwhelmed her, and she was afraid that she would leave with her breath, dissolve into the air, and the night would end. Usually no one called Michael. Christina didn't understand how it was possible. So if Michael disappeared from her life, she wouldn't notice it at all, just as long as he sent money. Christina wanted to call and offer Nancy a payoff. But there was an invisible line she shouldn't cross. Asking Michael about the shared house to pay Nancy for it was not an option, and yet she was infinitely surprised when his phone suddenly rang at 200 hours. They were still awake, though the bottle was almost empty. And this time, it wasn't wine, but tincture. Christina's eyes were already draining, and Michael seemed to be just really drunk. He reached for his phone, glanced at the number, and answered it immediately. Then he went into the bathroom and closed the door behind him. He came out 5 minutes later. Christina had been flirting the whole time. Not a word, not a sound. She hadn't been around at all. But now she asked in a falsely sympathetic tone, "What's the matter with your daughter? Sick?" "Burned out," Michael said. He seemed to want to punch her with his fist. Then bullocks with excess of feeling. He was glowing with joy as Christina sat down, ready to share in his celebration. Dan, there was almost nothing left. Michael flipped the bottle over his glass, and there's nowhere to take more until morning. You don't leave me anything yourself. I'm wasted and fuming as it is. So what happened? Maybe if it hadn't been for that particular moment, she wouldn't have known anything for a long time. But it all came together. Christina listened. She was lying under a warm blanket, but her hands and feet had become icy cold. And when Michael, in turn, fell asleep, she somehow got to the balcony, hung over the railing, and vomited for a long time on the flying lilac bushes. Luxury furniture is priceless antiques, you say. Ha ha. 3 times. Nobody needs them, those kids, Michael said in a memorized voice. I always know before they're brought in that they'll be taken away from home to this very orphanage. If it's something worthwhile, then it's easier this way. Like they run away from home, and that's it. That's all they'll whistle or the money's gone. You know how many of these bids go missing every year? Where? All over the country. And from their own alcoholic parents. That's a godsend. And if it's something really big, it's crazy. Once in 100 years a boy is like an angel, a girl like a doll, then you can get one from an orphanage. I'm sorry, they're not torn either. Things happen. Lost just like that. Where are they going? I didn't know if she was saying that or someone else. Into good hands, Michael said in the same confident, drunken voice. What do you think? I boil them in butter and pepper them just as good as they were. They won't be. What do you want? You want me to tell you all the schemes? It's a brandy thing. I thought the organs. Christina's voice got all thin. A squeak, not a voice. Come on, it's rare, Michael reassured her. I've done it a couple times. Just not chicky usually. One time. And anyway, there was this tiny Botticelli painting. His hair was below his knees. 3 years old is also a piece of cake. And they themselves, of course. I only drive bridges. There were others watching. Mother turned away in the store, and did she disappear at all? It happens. And where is she now? In a good country. Favored daughter. Michael said it with such pride, as if it were his own daughter. She's probably forgotten her hometown 100 years ago. Little ones have short memories. The Glock turned out to be a great gun, though Nancy gave a sum worth mentioning for it, and for Dizzy. The gun had 2 hiding places, one in the car and one in the house. Nancy understood the dangers of illegal possession, but she wasn't going to reach for the Glock until the last minute. And then she wouldn't care about anything else, as long as they stayed alive, or at least the sled. Nancy couldn't relax for a minute because of her daughter, and the female was getting harder and harder to handle. In this school she was in now, the girl was new. It was hard to get acclimated. It took time. And when the class was embroiled in a story, newbies are best suited to be scapegoats. In this case, goats. Young guys from some developmental center came to the school with some kind of program or project. Nancy didn't get into all that. She didn't care. Much worse, it was all about her daughter. The young educators had to give a few lectures, show slides. I guess it seemed like career guidance after all. And it had to happen that the girls fell in love with one of them, who was particularly good-looking. Nick Alex, she had nothing to do with it. But that bunch of girls who ran the class, accustomed to the attention of the guys, the girls had no doubt that they would have an easy success here too. They began to flirt with the teacher, giggled, asked provocative questions, stuck notes in his jacket pocket. They would have loved to dress up and sit down, as at a disco, but they realized that in such a form the director would not let them beyond the locker room. And then the bags in their teeth and behind the parents. So then one of these girls right at the lecture, when the guy was standing between desks, put her palm on the back pocket of his jeans and slightly squeezed. At this point, the young man's patience ran out. He went to the principal and asked to be excused from that class. Emily's, old school ladies. Even Shannon stood up in dismay. The class teacher and both head teachers, the school psychologist, the parents and the ladies from the police were immediately on the alert. Put everyone on the register and all the way to graduation. That was the least the girls were firmly promised. The female, who due to the peculiarities of her biography, not only was not friends with boys, but in general shunned all representatives of the male sex, was afraid of them, and did not trust them, now fell under the crush. The very girl who had done all this, sodding so that she was burnt with water, claimed Alex put her up to it. No, she didn't go easy on him. Promised her $5,000 for that kind of fun. And the girl needed the money badly. Daddy got fired from his job, family starving at home. So I had to take her up on it. Stupidly, of course. Stupidly. Forgive me for being a fool. This version of the girl voiced in the office of the director. Immediately, the female was summoned there when she heard what she was accused of. She was so blown away that she threw herself into agony right in front of Emily. Fury empowered the female, threw the girl to the floor, and began beating her fists fiercely. Nothing like this had ever happened in the principal's office before. What's there to register? The victim's mother took her daughter to the hospital for evaluation. Nancy was tracked down by telephone and told to report to school in a quarter of an hour. Emily probably thought that Nancy would be even more horrified than she was and would burst into tears, simultaneously shaming her daughter and begging for her forgiveness. I can do that. When Nancy entered the study where the solemn judgment was being prepared, the only thing she could see was that she was very tired, dead tired. Nothing else. Do you realize what Camille has done? Her parents are going to sue you and the school. The press will be here today. Never before. Not even the boys. Nancy stood and waited for that goal of outraged voices to be silenced. She would be heard. She didn't wait. Took a piece of paper out of her pocket, unfolded it, and laid it on the table. Here's the application I'm taking from the school. She was offended by what a classmate accused her of. And this girl will suffer no consequences except bruises. I believe that's called a minor injury. How much do her parents want? Now, unfortunately, honor issues are solved by money, and we will file a countersuit for slander and moral damage. When they drove home to 40, really looked guilty. We'll have to leave again because of me. Nancy sighed. We will, but you're not the main reason. Tell me, what happened? Asked her daughter. You'll be fine. So it's him again. And Alex stared out the window. Both of them realized what was waiting for them. They would have to pack their things very quickly, in a matter of hours, and take train tickets with a transfer, or even two. He was seen in a neighboring town. Investigator Cindy Jabrailova told Nancy on the phone this morning. But why? Why didn't you catch him then and give him a life sentence? Both realized the question was rhetorical. Cindy and her assistants had done everything they could. Wasn't there a worse time to get pregnant? No, there wasn't. There was no more inopportune man to have a child with. Christina stared at the test and felt for herself what a stupid expression she now had on her face. And yet she was still hoping for a possible mistake. A test bought at the drugstore. And she compared it without realizing it to an inexperienced medical professional who only assumes but is not sure of anything. She made an appointment with the city's best gynecologist for an appointment that cost a fortune. She didn't care. The appointment was a week in advance. 7 days sounded ominous, like the movie The Call. With great difficulty, Christina managed to focus on work, on these projects that could never be abandoned. When the order somehow managed to finish, the girl went around the room clasping her hands and something silently whispered, mouth, as if begging for something fate. Only 1%. She allowed herself to get rid of the child. Christina herself was given to her mother with great difficulty, a fictitious child. Long years of infertility treatment, when everything was put into motion. Parents turned to professors and grandmothers to drown. 100,000 sanatoriums, depression, attempted suicide, and finally, the long-awaited pregnancy, which could be terminated at any moment. Mom was on the reservation from the very beginning to the last day. And still Christina was born 7 months old. The girl imagined that something like this could happen in her life. God forbid. She would have been ready, though yesterday she had not thought about it yet, to bring up this child alone. Oh, she would have raised him. She would have had enough strength, time, money, and most importantly, love. But there was no hope that Michael would accept her decision and leave her alone. It was a trait of his character. He believed that what was mine was mine. I would not give it to anyone. And she was his girlfriend, and the child, in his opinion, would not belong to her mother, but primarily to him. Fate often suggests the answer to the question, what should I do? In an indirect, veiled way. So it happened, and with benefit. She went to the paid clinic as if she were going to be executed, and she was very surprised to see an old lady in line in front of her. Christina thought that only well-to-do ladies, for whom nothing is more important than their own health, were sitting here. No, there was an ordinary grandmother about 80 years old, thin and haggard. Her daughter brought her. She, of course, paid for the appointment, judging by how poorly the woman was dressed. It was a gesture of desperation. It is not known whether she would have come here for treatment or not, but she was willing to give her mother her last penny. Wendy was said to be a miracle worker, taking on almost hopeless cases. Christina entered the room after the grandmother was taken out, and from the scraps of conversation between the doctor and the nurse she realized that there was nothing that could be done, only relief. It was as if death had breathed on Christina. And when Wendy confirmed that she was pregnant, suddenly, for the first time in these nightmarish days, the girl was overcome with joy. The life she was now glimpsing was leaving, and there was no power to hold it back. But the new life was breaking into the light, and it was quite impossible to destroy it. "Thank you very much," Christina said. "No, if everything will be all right, I will be observed not in a paid, but in a regular consultation. Thank you." It sounded so sincere that the doctor's usual mask of sternness disappeared for a few seconds. Wendy smiled. "Good luck to you." Now it was necessary to do perhaps the most important thing, to slip away from Michael so inconspicuously, so that he would not go bankrupt, would not obstruct. Christina decided to walk like a swamp, prodding the ground in front of her. She didn't answer his calls right away. Sometimes she didn't pick up the phone at all. And the latter returned his calls, hoping to accustom him to this new attitude. Not right away, but he felt it. "Didn't you have another lover, or am I boring?" he asked, as if in jest. "Or do you have a schedule now? Today one, and tomorrow another. You're talking nonsense." What schedule? She did feel tired, but now she tried to make sure it was reflected in her voice. Unloaded to the brim with work from the top. If you have the ability and desire to verify what I say, verify it. Michael brushed it off, but Christina knew he would not miss the chance to check. A few days later, he brought up the subject again. When she refused to keep him company at a country restaurant. "Why do you write so much? Do you want to earn money for what?" Christina was making extraordinary progress in the art of lying. She shrugged. "But you know, basically, I have my own life. It's not like I'm going to demand that you get a divorce, and do everything I want. I'm gonna support myself. I want a country house, a computer, a minimum of 1,000 for 200 clients will travel, and I will work at home. I can see hotels with panoramic windows. Behind them, snow-covered coniferous forest. There's a fire burning in the fireplace. And I'll come to you. It sounded half a question, of course. You know I'm not focused on men. I'm focused on work. So hearing you talk about cheating is ridiculous to me. Christina was calculating her next steps. She didn't want to leave the big city, and she hadn't thought about it until recently. But if she had to, her father, mother, and elderly grandmother lived pretty far away. She would say that grandma needed to be cared for. You can't entrust an old lady into someone else's hands. If she wants to, let her check on her. Grandma lives separately. She is already 86, and of course at this age there are no healthy. And the granddaughter's help is simply necessary. And yes, Christina will really go away. Mom always said if her daughter was going to have a baby for herself, she'd take it. And I don't care if it's from a Negro, or a Chinese, or the President of France. Mom added, emphasizing the extent of her selflessness. And then the day came when Christina came home, and Michael was waiting for her, lying on the couch. He had had the key to her apartment for a long time, but lying there, doing nothing. It was so rare that Christina thought he was even sick and wanted to stay with me so as not to infect the household. "Why didn't you tell me you were pregnant?" Michael asked. As something insignificant, Christina took off her boots in the hallway. She froze, dreading that moment when she would accelerate and face him. At last, she managed to control herself. "How do you know?" she asked. She took the grocery bag into the kitchen and began to sort through its contents, taking her time. Some for the fridge, some for the cupboard. "Didn't I tell you? Don't even try to hide things from me. You have to say things like that. There's nothing to talk about yet. It's still a symbolic term. I get it. You haven't decided what to do with the baby yet. But don't even think about getting rid of it. I'm guessing you don't want him. In that case, treat him like a commodity, a very expensive commodity. It's all pretty straightforward." When her eyes widened in horror, that's something she couldn't have thought of. "Could you treat your child like that yourself?" He grinned. "You should know what I'm up to." Christina closed her eyes and leaned against the wall to keep from falling. It had happened on the most ordinary day. The female was going into first grade then, and Nancy was all nervous, even though the school was close by, and the kids could come home on their own. The parents of the little ones crowded at the classroom door long before the last class was over to pick up their children. There was nothing to sit on, but mothers and grandmothers stood in a tight circle and discussed. Everything seemed terribly important: what copybooks to buy, who and where took a physical education uniform, school meals, crumbs, first friendships and first feuds. They strayed from one topic to another, and when finally the bell rang and among the other guys came out tired, Nancy rushed to her with the question, "But how?" As if her daughter didn't have trivial math behind her, but at least the US. Then homework at home. Posture always did them under her mother's supervision. Together they collected a backpack for tomorrow, prepared clothes, and it was necessary to put the girl to bed on time, because Alex was not used to get up so early, did not fall asleep. For the first time she had shadows under her eyes. In short, the week was exhausting and scary for both of them. And if before they tried to plan something interesting for the weekend, this time Nancy decided not to go anywhere in themselves. "We'll have a leisurely breakfast, watch a movie, order a hamburger and ice cream at home." Nancy anticipated that even after lunch it would be possible to take a nap or at least to lie down with a book, to bask in the bath. At that time her ideas of happiness were the simplest. But then Michael called, saying that he was suddenly free and had already taken tickets for some children's play for the evening. When Nancy heard this, her face hid so much that her daughter giggled. "Good thing Daddy can't see you," she said, but it wasn't theatrical. They were both in the mood. Didn't feel like pulling out the outfits, Dad's emergency. Like Grandma Nancy used to say, then drive a long way. I didn't want to sit in the audience. I wanted to relax for once. But Nancy knew Michael could insist, so with a sigh, she opened her closet and began going through the racks of dresses. They didn't have a lot of clothes. Nancy wasn't much into fashion or dressing up. Evelyn didn't care much for bows and bars at that point. Michael was to pick them up at 5 o'clock. It was just about to rain. It was starting to get damp, and it would have been so nice to stay home. But who knew that fate would grant their wish in the most unexpected way? When the doorbell rang, Nancy was surprised. Michael had never before forgotten to take the key. But when she saw blood on the doorstep of the not-so-young policeman, an accident, Michael was dead. If he had been alive, she would have gotten a call from the hospital. There was not a shadow of sympathy on the faces of the policemen, however. They had come for Michael, and she had been forced to let them into the house to make sure he was gone, and had been gone since morning. Nancy followed them as they went around the rooms. What happened? He hit someone. It was the first thing that came to her mind. If he hadn't been hit, then he might even be dead, or some kind of business problem. But then do the police suddenly show up at a house like this? She didn't understand much about any of this, but it seemed to her that if there were any financial problems, Michael should have been sent a paper or invited somewhere. "You're coming with us," one of the policemen said. "What about the baby?" Nancy was confused. How long is this going to take? How am I going to leave her? Alone. What's wrong? They'll explain everything to you there. Nancy called a friend and asked her to come and sit with Evelyn until she got back. If it's too late, you can stay the night at my place. But what she learned at the police station was the end of her former life. At a noisy intersection, Michael's car stopped at a red light along with other cars. In the back seat sat a girl of about 6 or 7 years old. The man, who was preparing to cross the road, saw the desperate face of the child, flew to the glass, and the girl, realizing she had been spotted, screamed help. Everything was decided by seconds. The man's reaction was lightning fast. He managed to open the car door, grabbed the hands of the man behind the wheel. A fight ensued, which Michael would no doubt have won. He was younger and considerably stronger, but taking advantage of what was happening, the girl got out of the car and ran into the thick of people, into the yards. Michael slammed the door shut, and the car sped away. The story was absolutely stunning. "Nancy, what nonsense," she began. The husband had probably given that girl a ride. And as for the fact that she was calling for help, maybe there's such a family out there ready to blackmail to pay them. Faked a kidnapping. The young investigator shook her head. The girl had already been found. She's 7 years old. Her mom is a doctor, raising her alone. They were walking in the yard. The mother named her. The neighbors started complaining about her health. So the woman was only distracted for a few minutes, and in that time, the little girl disappeared. But that can't be. Everything that was happening seemed unreal to Nancy. It wasn't Michael. The man who hitched a ride with him got the make and license plate number. This man was hurt too, fortunately. Minor bumps, bruises. And the little girl, she didn't get far. According to her, everything happened like this. Her mom was out of sight, and this uncle opened the car door and called her. He said that mom was urgently called to the hospital, and she asked him to bring her daughter to her. The girl was lucky that she quickly realized something was wrong. Another girl would have driven on, hoping she was being taken to her mom. And there's almost a 100% chance the kidnapper would have gotten out of town. The two coincidentally ran a red light, and a stranger rushed to her aid. That's what saved her. Let me tell you something first. Nancy, my husband is not a maniac or a murderer. We have a daughter the same age as that baby. The investigator's girlfriend's voice turned cold. I don't know what the investigation will reveal, but now I wouldn't be surprised if you cover for him. Perhaps you knew about everything in advance. What are you talking about? I'm going to ask you questions, the investigator said, and you will answer them as truthfully as possible. Now the policeman's voice was ice cold. Then sign the report. Nancy was released in the late afternoon. The only way home now was by cab. Up to this point, Michael's phone, no matter how many times she called him, had not been answered. But suddenly, Nancy heard a familiar tune play in her purse and her husband's number pop up on the screen. But a moment before she bombarded Michael with questions, he said, "Be quiet. Listen to me, because I'm not calling again. I just got unlucky. I took the wrong job. Someone else should have done it. But that's just the way things are. Wait, wait, wait. Don't talk. You're right. I'm not a maniac or a murderer. Children are always okay. Now for a while, everyone's gonna lose me, including you. But I'll come back for you. Don't be afraid of interrogation. You have nothing to say. You really didn't know anything." As the investigation progressed, even those in charge of the investigation became uneasy, even though they were hardened men. It turned out that many were in the business and management in the rehabilitation center and in the orphanage. A peculiar price list was also discovered. Those parents who did not care whether their child would go to the state food or would be sent somewhere abroad received the least. Of course, not all children passed the selection process, and much mattered: gender, age, health, and appearance. The case was widely publicized, not so much because of children from marginalized families, but because several girls from well-to-do families disappeared. The vain search lasted for years. It cost the parents a lot of money, up to and including the madhouse. And the clue lay close at hand. Now many people have been sentenced, and only Michael has managed to escape. Nancy had already been through a terrible shock. Her family had collapsed. She found herself the wife of an outcast criminal. But that wasn't all. She started receiving anonymous phone calls. She was intercepted at the front door of the house. "Your husband robbed us of our daughter. It'll be the same with your girl. We'll give you the last of our money. Hire a man, but be prepared." Although the young woman's psyche was teetering on the brink at the time, she didn't have the luxury of institutionalization. Investigator Cindy, with whom Nancy had interacted more than anyone else during this nightmarish case, and who far from immediately believed that the wife was not involved in her husband's affairs, knew nothing about them, gave the go-ahead to leave. Now Nancy remembered with heartache the time, how naive and soft she had been, how she had tried to hope for something good. They hadn't even noticed the tracks. They went to a southern town, but not by the sea, and not in a resort area. To make it cheaper, they rented an apartment. They had the most common surname. Nancy was resting from the fact that the bullying seemed to be over. She worked remotely and in grocery, hardware, and bakery stores. No one was interested in her past. As she settled the girl into school, she explained that the child needed a warm climate. "Evelyn is often sick. We decided to try living here. If they like everything, they will sell the old apartment and move permanently." Of course, the old easygoing attitude was gone. Nancy felt guilty in front of the children's parents for loving a man for too long, breaking their lives, trusting him and not noticing anything. And yet it was a reprieve. Evelyn had begun real childhood again, with girlfriends and cartoons, with New Year's parties and princesses and different dresses, with dreams of what would happen tomorrow, in a day in the summer. And Nancy unwittingly made plans too. She really liked the landlord of the apartment she and her daughter rented. He was an old man. He himself lived in a small house on the outskirts of the city and rented the apartment. The one room was clean, with simple repairs and the most necessary furniture. Nancy paid regularly. She and her daughter were quiet tenants, so they had the kindest relations with the landlord. The old man preferred to come for money. In the beginning, he himself did not stay longer than 5 minutes. He made sure that the apartment and the tenants were all right. He put some bills in his wallet and said goodbye. Then he and Nancy got to talking. From then on, she started inviting Sebastian over for tea. The old man had lived a long life, was a keen beekeeper, and told many interesting stories about the town's past. And when Evelyn at the end of the evening timidly approached him and asked for permission to get a kitten, the old man was quite sympathetic and patted her on the head. "You can have a dinosaur." He gave her permission. They had already agreed that it was from Sebastian that Nancy would buy the apartment, for which he was asking a very reasonable sum, and they both got used to the place. And then the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, and Nancy assumed that it was probably from the bank, another amateur credit imposition, or perhaps fraudsters posing as investigators. There were plenty of them now. But when she heard her husband's voice, she almost dropped the cell phone, dropped the call, stood with her heart. Michael called again and again, and again, until she finally answered, "What do you want?" He couldn't help but note the hatred that sounded in her voice. His own voice, however, sounded calm and even relaxed. "I just missed you. Forget this room and both of us forever. How much grief. Levchenko, listen to me." He continued to speak so serenely, as if it was a question of what to cook for dinner tonight. "Be patient a little longer. Soon I'll take you both, and we'll leave. If you need money, let me know and I'll wire it to you. It's a good thing you chose Pinsk." He named the very town they were living in now. "So small, out of sight. I'll let you know when it's time to pack. I can't call you often, you know, but you'll still hear from me or through my men. And he'll be out of our lives." So many feelings of pleading, rage, and disgust were put into these few words that even Michael was affected. There was silence for 2 seconds. "Song, do you really want to be alone?" Michael asked softly. "What do you mean alone? I don't think you'll go back to your mom. You've long since weaned yourselves off each other. Your father might need your presence, your help. Cirrhosis is such a thing. Maybe taking care of Dad will make you feel better about losing your baby." Nancy felt her eyes popping out of her orbits. "It happens in moments of extreme terror. I want to tell you a story that concerns you and me directly. You don't know, of course, that once upon a time during an operation, a sickly and beautiful little girl named Evelyn was born, and a sickly boy with multiple disabilities called cerebral palsy. You were sound asleep under anesthesia and didn't know anything. Why would you be so upset? So I decided to give you a gift. This little girl you got. Cost me a lot of money, but she's worth it, isn't she? And now you and I may be doing very well, or you may be doing very badly. Where is it now? I'm telling you, it's either really, really good or really bad. The hour will come when everything will be settled, everything will be prepared, and the 3 of us will go abroad, under different names, of course. And there, if you want to, you can see this child. But what if I don't? Evelyn's real parents are looking for her, Lessing. I don't expect you to believe me. Take a DNA test yourself at a lab of your choice. Get the results, and then I'll call you, and we'll have a good talk." She woke up on the floor, and it took her a long time to realize if she was still alive and functioning, or if she had had a stroke, for example. And now she couldn't move her arm. Somehow she crawled to the bed and frightened the female. Returned from school by the fact that she could hardly speak and did not think well. The girl cooked her own dinner, brought her mother tea and sandwiches. She knew about those who are sick. It is necessary to take care. But Nancy could not eat, and only made a sign for her daughter to leave her alone. It wasn't until nightfall that consciousness finally cleared. Now Nancy could not forgive herself that the conversation had ended this way, though it was not up to her. No matter how monstrous what Michael had said, Nancy had believed him, and now she was tormented by several questions at once: how to make her stay with her forever, because she would never accept that the girl was not her own daughter; how to find out what was wrong with her own son. Where is he? How to take him back to her. And finally, how to free herself from Michael. It was possible to go crazy from it, because to achieve all the goals at the same time, apparently, it is impossible. Or tie your life to a criminal you hate, or losing both kids. Another option to try to get out of harm's way at least. Nancy had never liked detectives, never read them. She didn't like feeling like a fool. For 100 or 2 pages, the author led the reader to a clue, occasionally giving clues, lighting up beacons. In the end, when it came to the last pages, the reader only had to slap his or her forehead. God, how could I not have guessed who the culprit was? It was so easy. But Nancy, now it seemed that she was in some surreal labyrinth, in some nightmare. And she didn't know how to get out, because she had no experience. She went to a nearby town, bought a cell phone, a SIM card that wasn't registered to her, and called Cindy the investigator. Never would she tell her the whole truth because it would be taken away from her immediately and get to the bottom of who her real parents were. Nancy only said that Michael occasionally calls her with threats, so she wants to change her documents through the registry office, take a different last name, and cut off loose ends. Go somewhere where she and her daughter won't be found. She understands everything, but she is not going to become a live wire to catch Michael. She's a weak woman, and she's scared. Surprisingly, they backed her up, gave her the go-ahead, even put her in touch with some people. Just ask her to take her time and do it carefully. Maybe there'd be another call that would clear things up. There was a call, just not the one Nancy had expected or Cindy had hoped for. Later, Nancy decided it was her own fault. "How could you?" she asked. "You mean the boy?" He grinned, somewhat grudgingly. "He's alive, not starving. He could have gone to the showdown." "I've had that thought. Basically inferior specimens." That's when she screamed monster and started banging the phone against the wall, because the only alternative was to bang her head into the wall. The very next day, she rented a car, a house, and left with Evelyn, taking the bare minimum of belongings with her, and cut all ties. And there were new papers and new cities, and nightly prayers that the man who had created all this would disappear, dissolve, melt away like smoke without a trace, and that even if she never sees her son, God will take care of him wherever he is. But never, never again would Nancy be able to relax and everything else that came into her life, and that desire to learn to shoot. And these apartments she'd so carefully picked out with alarms, preferably backdoor, was the kind of craziness that would stay with her until the end. To give birth, Christina went to her parents. They were overjoyed. The rest of her acquaintances were perplexed to trade a huge city, where the apartment, career for a small town, in which to find a job, where the salary of $20,000, it is normal, and $30,000 means fabulous luck. That the girl came here. She's going to have a baby without a husband. It's a bad time. No one can blame her. And it's all over the place nowadays. But the parents didn't recognize the daughter and Christina, who used to come home only at night. It was like that since 15 years old, then at friends' houses, then at some parties, festivals. You'd never know, as long as she called to say she was alive. Christina hasn't left the house right now. And not to say that she was not feeling well, but all day long either lay with headphones, with the phone, or sat, and as a model mother, undermined diapers. In vain. Her mother tried to send her at least to the store, at least to the park for a walk. And every day the parents noted in the daughter more and more oddities. More than once or twice a day, she came to check if the front door was locked. She couldn't stand it when someone came without prior arrangement. She made her mother ask who to look through the peephole. And if she was home alone, she never opened the door for anyone. What happened? One time, my mother couldn't take it. "Did you get ripped off or something?" Christina only shook her head negatively. But her mother's imagination knew no bounds, and she whispered in the kitchen with her father. There must have been a theft after all. And probably even threatened. Maybe with a knife. Oh, what if she'd been abused? And a baby. Here already Christina could not stand it, came out, and asked tired, "Mom, what are you talking about?" "Write novels. We're novels to real life. Olechka, don't be afraid. We'll bring up even from Freddy Krueger." Oh my God. I think I'm drunk, even though I'm not allowed. "Daddy, would you tell her?" "I've told you 100 times. A married man, that's all. Doesn't run around with gloves, fingers, blades, and a striped sweater. Christina took a whiskey. That's right. She got a really bad headache and retired to her room. Her son came into the world quite safely. The labor had been easy. The only thing the midwife didn't like was the birthmark on the boy's cheek. When he's a little older, see a surgeon. You will operate, she said sympathetically to the young mother. The fact that Christina was even happy about this cosmetic effect was beyond her imagination. And Christina thought most of all in this market are good-looking girls. A boy with such a flaw wouldn't be of interest to him. Probably not. She convinced herself of this, and yet she was afraid to let the child out of her hands. Other mothers, especially experienced ones, willingly agreed to let their infants spend the night in the pediatric ward and bring them in for feeding in the morning. Good night. This is a luxury. When else will there be an opportunity to sleep for hours on end, to recuperate? And Christina wanted her son to sleep not in a crib, but with her, between herself and the wall to crush the little one. Scolded the midwives for sleeping and imagining. Christina put her son in the crib, but at night, when the lights were turned off in the room, she still did her own thing. Though it was foolish to think anyone would break in, no one disturbed her. She was discharged from the maternity hospital, and for a while she led the life of a recluse. All was quiet, no call, no letter, much less a visit. Although if desired, Michael could easily find out where she lived and who she gave birth to. Gradually, she began to walk with a stroller, and when Benjamin began to walk, she already let him play in the sandbox with other children. But Christina never agreed to do the operation, even though her parents persuaded her to do it later, she said. Benjamin went to kindergarten. They were preparing for the matinee, and Christina was going to dress up her son in a night costume. That's when the phone rang. "Do you need anything for your son?" Michael asked, as if they'd broken up yesterday. And since he didn't hear the answer, I continued, "That's why I'm asking, because I'll be leaving soon for good, and it's unlikely that you'll be able to contact me afterwards. Do the operation, Benjamin. We are beautiful. And our guy should be just as good. I'm sorry about the way things turned out between us. I'll see if I can help you guys later. But right now, I have to get Nancy out, even though she doesn't know it yet." Christina had a client Christina used to do her apartment. It took 3 wagons and 2 carts of patients. Today, everything was agreed upon, down to the color of the lid on the washing machine in the bathroom. But in the evening, the client had dinner with a friend that tossed her fresh ideas, and in the morning, the carefully crafted project fell apart like a house of cards. One idea pulled the next, and there was no end to it. In the end, Christina S. canceled because she saw it wasn't working, and she cared about her name. God forbid the client will start bragging about who designed her apartment. Christina brought the client to her home. "Oh," said the woman and sank down on the couch to take a slow look. "I like it. Please do me the same." The issue was resolved, and now this same client helped Christina get the addresses of Nancy's parents. She had the right connections, and the matter took half an hour. Addresses, phone numbers. There was no way a father and mother wouldn't know where their daughter and granddaughter were. Christina called the mother first. The woman appeared to have a very young, gentle, and cold voice, although Christina had manufactured and rehearsed in advance what she would say. To be brief and to the point, you do not find that the friend of the ex-husband is not the best recommendation. Nancy's mother asked with a slight sneer. "We both know what kind of husband he is, and I know what you mean by friend. I won't tell you Nancy's address, and don't you dare blackmail me with the danger she's in. Don't call again." There was one last hope for her father. Christina tried calling him several times, but no one picked up. Finally, when she had given up hope, she answered, judging by her voice, "Some old woman, and he sold the apartment," the old woman said, after she found out who the neighbors were. The last thread had broken, and he hadn't left a new address or even a phone number. Christina begged because she had no hope anymore. "Did you buy this apartment?" "No, I was his neighbor," the grandmother explained. and he's in a hospice. But you know, the one on Nicotinsky. The parents agreed to look after Benjamin. When Christina saw Nancy's father, she immediately realized that he didn't have much time left, maybe only days. His face was yellow, like a mask of skinny lice. The man was lying in the ward, and at the appearance of the guest, did not even make an attempt to rise. He no longer had the strength to do so. Christina moved a chair closer, sat down, and spoke openly. She had no other choice but to reveal her cards fully. She told both about her long association with Michael and about the fact that, while she knew of Nancy's existence, she hadn't considered it, and about the fact that she hadn't known she could hate like that. And if Nancy was not warned now, there was a glass of water by his table, and in it was a pipe. Christina understood what that meant. The man can't lift his own head, and he can't take the glass. Someone has to put that tube in his lips. The man still had the strength to touch her hand with cold fingers. I believe you, especially since I can't protect anyone else. That man has deprived me of even having my daughter by my side when He sighed. I sold the apartment to buy her a house. It was picked up at my request by a small town in the cabin, a small fortress. Bars on the windows, iron doors. Even a cellar under the house that you can climb into and lock yourself inside. A kind of safe for people who need protection. And I'm the only one who knows the address. I'll tell you. Remember it. It was a nice little town that must have looked marvelous in the summer. But never before or anywhere had Nancy been treated with such longing. And the house her father had chosen for her suited them perfectly. It stood on an eminence from which everything was perfectly visible. It was like a little fortress. But Nancy was unpacking and crying, trying to hide her tears from her daughter. She had to be with her father now, though he understood and had forbidden her to come. Said he would call her when he felt like it. What kind of forces were helping this ghoul who had broken her life time after time? And not just her. How does he keep finding her over and over again? Was he aided by some extensive network of helpers, or was he working with a psychic? Nancy was ready to believe anything, but had to pull herself together and start over once again. Amazingly, every time Nancy felt like the strength was gone, completely gone. Even on the driveway, it would come from somewhere, and she would do what she needed to do again. She walked around the house from attic to floor, checking every door, every frame, making sure the bars on the windows were secure and the locks were in good working order. When she started checking for the third time, she was convinced she was getting paranoid. She was very thirsty. Nancy rarely allowed herself that, but right now she'd give anything for a couple cans of stout beer. But what there was she generously squirted into a cup of valerian, squeezed water. It turned out to be a brandy version. Nancy drank it in one gulp. "So what's school like here?" Alex asked. Her mother could no longer completely hide the danger from her, as she had done before. But the girl's psyche was still surprisingly plastic. She was not in danger of depression. She didn't like her new room very much. It wasn't that it was small, but the window faced north, and on top of that, it faced a blank fence. Alex hung posters of her favorite artists on the wall. With familiar faces staring back at her, she felt at home everywhere. "I don't know," Nancy shrugged for now. "Let's think about homeschooling." "Cool. You'll be able to go out at least some of the time." Nancy felt in this question the longing of a creature locked in a cage and longing for a little freedom of a mother who limits her sick children in something. One realizes otherwise it is impossible. No one can make their child live by other rules. But by 40, she was healthy. She should be out riding her bike with her friends, going to ballroom dances and birthday parties with her girlfriends. And Nancy keeps her in a cage. "Give me a week." She asked her mother to look around. "I'll see what's going on and decide." Alex took a deep, deep breath. And Nancy, looking at her daughter's face, wondered how she hadn't noticed it before. No, she knew Alex was nothing like her. Not one bit. Not a single trait in common. But Michael seemed to have something in common. Girls often look more like their fathers than their mothers, and vice versa. So her son looks like her. But why was it all just on her shoulders? Nancy honestly tried to recall if she had fallen in love with anyone in her youth other than Michael. But at least there were some portraits on the walls like a female. Had she married too young? Yeah, maybe when she was watching action movies. Michael loved the genre, sometimes identified with the heroine, whom the hero saved from every conceivable and unthinkable danger, with whom there is no need to be afraid. And day and night the brain will not be drilled with thoughts. Have you foreseen everything? No need to think about anything. It's like being behind a stone wall. One of her friends had a husband who looked nothing like a movie hero. An old man, a little heavy and completely gray, a former military pilot. Oli had a severe form of diabetes. Her daughter was born with Down syndrome. But how Ethan loved his girls. How he worried about forgetting to take their medication. He planted a Garden of Eden for them outside his house. His friends gave them to his daughter, because riding is, you know. Even when she, Nancy, who seemed to have nothing to do with Ethan, was near him, she felt safe, as if nothing bad could happen to her. A week had passed in the new place, and the promises made to Hanka had to be fulfilled. In the morning, Nancy said, "I will go to the bakery." But the habit she had lately acquired of carrying a gun with her always and everywhere, she could not give up. If any policeman tried to search her, it would end badly. Nancy fell only on the fact that it would never occur to anyone in a small town. Auntie goes to get bread, crosses the road at a green light. What do you gentlemen in uniform want with her? The day was surprisingly nice. They loved flowers in this town. Here and there in the front garden they were memorialized with velvets, Honey Wendy. The majors were rising proudly. Nancy remembered that as a child she could not remember the names of these flowers. They were called Lieutenant Colonel. You promoted them too. Father laughed. She lingered in the bread store, taking some pleasure in shopping for the first time in a long time. The bread smelled so good here under arrest. Such beautiful cakes lay in the display case. Nancy was choosing what to take for breakfast. What would please the loaf of kolache, poppy seed pies, yogurt with peaches, a simple loaf for sandwiches, delicately pink sausage. She was approaching the house when someone sitting on the low metal fence stood up and stepped toward her. Hi, a tall man in a black jacket, a cap covering not only his forehead but his eyebrows as well. It took Nancy 2 seconds to recognize Michael had already overwhelmed her. Maybe if Nancy had been a professional fighter in the military, training to the point of complete automaticity of movement, the gun would already be in her hands. But the shooting range was one thing and another. She'd never pointed a barrel at a live target, not even a rat. Her only hope was that he didn't know she had a gun at all. "Let's talk," he said peacefully and even with a smile, like he was just a regular Sunday butterfly who had come to make arrangements to visit the baby at a certain time. There were so many words Nancy wanted to say, and they were tearing from her throat. But she restrained herself to let Michael speak first. "What does he want?" "We'll go away," he said. Finally, it all came together. All the docs are in hand. It's a great opportunity waiting for us. We're going to Europe. Small town too, but not as shit as here. We'll have our own house waiting for us. I'll continue doing what I love, selling fashion secrets. You'll grow tulips. We'll put posture in a good school, just like the one you went to when you were a kid. He kept his trump card up his sleeve. And if you want, you can see your son once in a while. I don't think he should be taken away from where he lives now. Handicapped people don't belong amongst ordinary people. But my dear, how long will it take you to pack? We're not going anywhere with you," she said. He raised his eyebrows. "But you realize that in this case you never will, and I'll try to find him myself. But even if you don't, you've heard read your ears 10 times. I'm not going anywhere with you, and you're not taking me to the bank." Michael stared at her for a long time. Maybe a minute, maybe even longer. "Well," he said, "this was practically your last chance. There's a spark of hope left, so to speak." He held one hand down, and now something clicked distinctly in it. Nancy shuddered, but remained silent. Then Michael spoke. You want to know that it's now a fire starting in your house, a remote control, the kitchen catching fire. And it's going to go very fast from there. Your plan, my house, my fortress is now playing against you. Bars on the windows, iron door. You won't open it, by the way, while you were buying caps. That's clever. It didn't take a man to pull a key out of your pocket, so the sled won't get out of there. She might last longer if she guessed to hide in the bathroom. But smoke and fire. Michael shrugged. They'll get her anyway. And I don't see a man with a car nearby to snag a rope, rip the bars off the window. And don't look at me like I'm an animal. That's not my daughter. And that girl has nothing to do with me. Of course, I can still open the door. Do you have the key? Asked Nancy. The gun was already in her hand. One thing she hadn't expected was that he would knock it out with an elusive, sudden movement. What didn't he expect? It was that the weapon would fly at the girl's feet, which approached them at that instant. Christina had never known how to shoot. She didn't know anything about how to load a gun, didn't know what a safety was. Only in movies had she seen the trigger pull, her hands shaking. She was just so damn lucky. The day was so overcast that at 12 o'clock it felt like dusk. Nancy's route was from cemetery to cemetery. She hailed a cab and asked to be taken to her father's house. The plot was new, and just beyond her father's grave, there was still a forest growing, pine trees standing. And the ground here was bloody bad, just rocks. Nancy, like many people, came to the cemetery and distracted herself with thoughts. We should order some proper soil, plant some flowers. No, Dad really liked the smell of pine needles. Sooner or later the big spruce trees cut down the forest. And on the grave she'll plant dwarf ones. And the monument she had already looked closely at, a simple granite one, with a white marble rose that lay on top. She wanted very much to hug the cross and sob like a little girl in her voice. Nancy knew what she would do, so a little later she would come home. And while Alex is at school, she will drink a glass of vodka and cry and even howl and bang her head on the table. But right now, hold out a little longer. The cab driver wasn't leaving. She asked him to stick around. Nancy gave him the address of another cemetery in the suburbs. You have a memorial today, the driver clarified. He was in a good mood and wanted to talk. The passenger seemed calm, but he couldn't talk to her. When had he turned on the music? Nancy walked slowly toward Michael's grave. It's 40 days today. One could only hope that his soul would never return from hell. A turn in the alley, then another. There was someone at the grave. A woman in a coat so deep red you couldn't take your eyes off her red hat with a little boy in her arms. Had she really come to? As Nancy approached, the woman turned around and Nancy recognized Christina. Christina lowered Benjamin from her arms. I've been thinking, she said, as if continuing the conversation. Why is there a cross here? There should be an aspen stake. I've been thinking about that too. It was autumn. No frost, no tears. Nancy wiped her face with her gloved hand. But he won't get up. Can we have a dance? Asked Christina in a whisper. I wore boots with sharp heels on purpose. You can do it on the loose clay. On the red hill, she tried to dance something like an awkward read-along with the sharp heels. Nancy put her arms around her and pressed her against her. They stood in silence for a long time, and then sat down on a bench that stood by another grave, but not far from where Michael lay. What about you? Nancy asked. I'm going back to my house for good. And you, Christina, have you been crying? I'm looking, said Nancy. I don't know if I'll find it or not, but I'll keep looking as long as I live. And I don't have any leads yet. All I know is that in Europe they're going to walk to every home for the disabled, every orphanage. Maybe he's living with a family somewhere. You don't even know a name. Nancy shook her head, only that he would probably look like me, even though he's very sick. And what about Evelyn? I mean, you realize now what it's like for her real parents. I'd like to get her to 18 so she's not taken away from me, so she can decide where she wants to go, who she wants to be with. But I realized that for the people who lost her every day is an eternity without her. I don't know. It's really hard to think about. Maybe we worked it out somehow. I don't know what kind of people are out there. I need to see them. What's next? God knows. We live as a family. Or have her stay at my place or theirs by the time she's 40. How he tied it all into one devilish knot. Nancy waved helplessly. Benjamin became bored. He wandered between the graves, examining them. On one sat a white stone dove. On another, a plump angel spread its wings. On a third, an aunt with a long blanket on her head covered her face with her hands. She seemed to be crying, and here there was a candle lit. Careful, it won't fall on any reward. His mother shouted to him. What's decided about the operation? Asked Nancy Christina. It's a piece of cake for any plastic surgeon, she replied. Maybe I'll wait until after Benjamin goes to school. I understand about the painkillers and all that, but I have such a low pain threshold right now that I can't even squash a cockroach. Your house is a work of art. Are there really cockroaches in there? They laughed. It was a kind of laughter, a timid little audible one. And yet, Benjamin knew which grave they had come to. It was dull to the point of disgust, dull, red earth, and nothing else. Near one of the monuments there were roses in a stone vase. Benjamin pulled one flower, a dark red poe, that seemed particularly beautiful to him. Benjamin decided to put the rose on the grave of the man for whom his mother and that aunt were crying. No, the women shouted with glee. Surprised, Benjamin almost dropped the rose. The rain had stopped freezing. It was a little brighter around. Even a bird made a sound. Benjamin went over and, taking advantage of the fact that his friends were talking about something, he shot the flower, shot it, strangled it, and started dropping petals in their laps.